I once thought that the day my son got married would be the happiest moment of my life, witnessing the child I had loved with all my heart, raised through sweat and tears, now grown and starting a family of his own. But instead of joy, I was struck by a devastating blow. He flat out forbade me from attending his wedding, simply because I am a construction worker. And that wasn't all. He threw in my face an enormous invoice worth $125,000, every extravagant expense itemized in detail. A grand wedding hall, a luxurious gourmet menu, a custom-made wedding dress, and even a lavish honeymoon in the Maldives. At the bottom of the bill, in handwriting as cold as a death sentence, he wrote, "Be grateful. I'm giving you the chance to prove you're not entirely useless." In that moment, my heart grew heavy, bitterness flooded my chest, and then suddenly it all dissolved, replaced by an icy clarity. I smiled a strange, unfamiliar smile because I realized that Dream Wedding was no longer a celebration, but a chessboard. And on that board, I was the one holding the very first move. With just a single precise step, the proud castle he had built so carefully would collapse into ashes. And believe me, what was about to unfold next was something you could never imagine. The envelope was thick, pale cream in color. Just a glance was enough to know it was expensive, the kind usually used to send contracts, not to write a letter to one's father. On the front, my name was neatly written in squared-off handwriting. I recognized it immediately, because it was the same hand that once scribbled on a science fair board, the same messy scrawl on birthday cards. Back then, I had felt proud, but now, looking at it again, all that remained was a sad memory. I sat there, holding the envelope, noticing how unusually heavy it felt, as if inside were not papers, but a burden. I turned it over and over, my fingers running along the sealed edge, sweat forming down my back though the day was not hot. In my mind flickered mornings long past, him sitting in this very kitchen, his feet not yet reaching the floor, breathing in the scent of vanilla pastries, telling me that one day he would become a doctor. I had believed in that dream, had raised him with all my hope. And now, in this same kitchen, I held an envelope from him, yet my heart felt anything but joyful. I once thought, or rather, once hoped, that it could be a wedding invitation. After 8 months of silence, that alone was enough for me to tell myself that perhaps he had reconsidered. Perhaps Sophie had changed too, no longer seeing my presence as a stain on the perfect picture they tried so hard to preserve. But the moment I slipped my finger under the edge of the envelope and tore the seal, every hope vanished. No warning, only a hollow emptiness spreading through my chest. The paper inside was thick, firm, resembling the invoice of a major contract. And indeed, the very first lines made me rub my eyes, doubting myself. Rose Hill Estate, $74,500. Emerald Feast Catering, $29,500. Santorini Honeymoon, $13,720. I read it once, then again, my eyes fixed on each figure, searching for a mistake, but everything stood clear, precise, and chillingly exact. And then I saw the final line, handwriting, the familiar script I once cherished when he was young, when those letters appeared on birthday cards or school assignments. Now, that very script carved into my memory like a blade, written with the pen I had gifted him back in college. Be grateful. I'm giving you the chance to prove you're not completely useless. I sat frozen, the paper trembling in my hands. This was not just numbers, this was his way of casting me aside, a cold and final message, the end of the bond between father and son. Gratitude. That word echoed in my head, ricocheting like a stone dropped into a dry well, striking against every barren wall. Gratitude was when I sold my old car, the one that had carried me across hundreds of miles of construction sites, just to have enough money for his mother's brain surgery. Gratitude was when I accepted the red foreclosure notice from the bank, when I bowed my head to beg for an extension, just so he could finish his final term at Westbridge University without being forced to quit. And this time This was not gratitude. This was a cold indictment, a naked command demanding my submission. I flung the stack of papers down. They struck the surface of the old wooden table with a dry, hollow thud, echoing back at me like an invisible slap. My eyes drifted over the pile of papers, then toward the arched doorway leading into the living room. There, my father's pocket watch still lay quietly on the mantel. The worn brass casing caught the light with each steady tick, a rhythm that had followed me throughout my childhood. That sound once lulled me to sleep, and later, I carried it into my own years of fatherhood, through sleepless nights soothing Daniel to rest, through winter mornings when Helen was too weak to rise from bed. And now, that very boy had cast me aside from the most important day of his life, tossing me an invoice as though I were nothing more than a faceless sponsor. I leaned back into the chair. My knees throbbed with the familiar ache that came whenever the weather turned damp, and the wooden frame creaked out a brittle note, small, lost, adrift in the stillness of the kitchen. A silence in stark contrast to the hollow noise they still dared to call happiness. A memory returned, so vivid it felt as though it had happened only yesterday. Daniel, 9 years old, his legs submerged in the waters of Cedarbrook Creek, his once white boots now splattered with mud. The oversized fishing rod trembled in his hands, yet his smile shone so brightly that even the gap where his front tooth had been couldn't dim it. Moments later, when the storm rolled in and the sky turned gray, he came running toward me, clutching the fishing rod tight against his chest, his eyes sparkling as he cried out, "Dad, you're the strongest superhero." That boy, he would have been sitting beside me now at the makeshift charcoal stove, his hands smeared with mustard, chomping on roasted meat and laughing without restraint. And now? The man he became leaves me his own father sitting at home, just so Sophie Grant's suit-clad friends wouldn't have to endure an awkward conversation with an old, retired construction worker in a worn-out suit. I shot up to my feet. The chair screeched harshly against the tiled floor, tearing through the silence of the kitchen. I walked to the sink, turned on the faucet, and splashed handfuls of cold water straight onto my face. The icy sting pulled me back. I exhaled sharply, letting the drops trail down my neck, soaking into my collar a discomfort, yes, but a necessary one. It felt like a slap meant to wake me. What they wanted was to see me lose my temper, to make a phone call like some old man out of control. I could see the whole scene play out. Daniel sighing, eyes drifting away, Sophie folding her arms behind him, her lips curling into a satisfied smirk. And the call would end with that cold, monotonous beep, leaving me cast as nothing more than a senile, hot-headed fool. I would not hand them such a cheap victory. If I responded, it had to be precise, something they would never expect. Slowly, I dried my hands with the kitchen towel, then turned back to the table. Picking up the envelope, I tucked the stack of papers neatly inside. I walked into the living room and placed it beneath my father's pocket watch. 2 generations, 2 silences, now layered one upon the other. I understood exactly what that meant, not hiding it away, but keeping it like a weapon waiting for the moment to be drawn. "All right then, Daniel," I whispered, my voice so low it seemed swallowed by the ticking of the watch. "You'll learn what gratitude truly means when the time comes to pay the price." That line was never meant for him, he wasn't worthy of it. It was a promise to myself, a vow anchored to the last shred of honor left in a man who had once given everything. And this time, there would be no forgiveness. Within sight, I saw the laptop lying abandoned on the kitchen counter, covered with a thin layer of dust like ashes. I had neglected it for many weeks, ever since the last time I opened it only to stare at the dry numbers in the savings account. That money, every dollar saved from overtime contracts at the construction site, from countless frugal dinners, was a secret I had never told anyone. Then I froze at a strange detail in the invoice. Amidst the extravagant expenses, fresh flowers, banquet hall, lighting there hid a small line that seemed harmless, yet pierced my eyes like a thorn. Crystal Lens Studios. Deposit of $7,280. I knew that name. They weren't just wedding photographers. They also specialized in media for corporate conferences, turning private moments into promotional tools. Clearly, either Daniel or Sophie, or both, were plotting to turn this wedding into a brand launch. The corner of my mouth lifted, but that smile held no warmth. It was a smile of contempt. I drained the last of the cold coffee, then set the cup down hard in the sink. The sound of porcelain striking steel echoed sharply, like a final period. I rinsed it clean, flipped the cup upside down on the rack. Every movement was slow, deliberate, a way to reclaim my breath, to remind myself that control had never truly slipped from my hands. And I knew this would not erupt into a loud quarrel, nor into an outburst poured through a phone call. It would be like a screw turned slowly, like a thin thread quietly pulled apart, silent, discreet, almost invisible, until the grand carpet they so proudly laid out began to tear, piece by piece. And when it ripped, the entire celebration they built with arrogance would collapse right beneath their feet. I pulled out a chair at the kitchen counter and opened the laptop, its hinges creaking dryly as though complaining of being forgotten for too long. A thin layer of dust lifted into the air, tickling my nose and making me sneeze, but I didn't bother to wipe it away. The screen lit up, its pale blue glow washing across my face in the dark kitchen, turning me into a silent shadow about to unearth a secret. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the knowledge that once I pressed the first key, there would be no turning back. This was no longer the pastime of a retiree. This was the spark. I typed Crystal Lens Studios. The website appeared, glossy and overflowing with lights and perfectly staged smiles. Couples seemed to step right out of magazines, corporate parties transformed into luxurious advertisements. Every photo was meticulously arranged, as though love itself were just another product to be packaged and sold. Then I saw it. Inside a hidden folder, a line appeared. D+S, 4 weeks left. Clearly, someone had been careless enough to let it slip through. I remained calm, no shock, no surprise, just a confirmation. Like the moment a doctor reads the results of a test you already know deep down. I leaned back, eyes lifting to the ceiling, letting my breath drift slowly away. Memories surged without warning. The last time Daniel looked at me without anything in between. 6 years ago, on the porch, the scent of freshly cut grass, roses, and grilled meat blending together. He was chewing as he spoke, sauce smeared on his lips. "Dad, without you, I couldn't have done it." And I believed him, believed with naive certainty. But then Sophie stepped in, not just into the house, but into him. She didn't simply ask, she edited, rewrote, and staged Daniel himself, like a stylist choosing outfits for a photo shoot. I turned back to the screen, switched tabs, and searched for the booking policy of Rose Hill Estate. I had been there once, many years ago when Helen was still alive. We strolled through the garden on a Sunday afternoon, her smile glowing beneath an arch of flowers as she said it looked like a fairy tale scene. The website confirmed what I needed, a 50% deposit, non-refundable. Lose that amount, and the wedding day would vanish. The fine print was clear, precise, merciless, like a domino set into place. One small push, and the whole line would collapse. The humming of the refrigerator faded, leaving only the ticking sound. Each drop of the second hand felt like it was recording, carefully marking every chapter, every moment of Daniel. That clock had been there since the first day he went to kindergarten, through the nights when Helen and I stayed awake because of his fevers, to the morning he stepped out the door in his graduation gown. I remember clearly Helen's face when Daniel received the acceptance letter from Westbridge University. She stood at the kitchen doorway, the letter trembling in her hand, her eyes glowing with gentle pride. "He will do great things," she whispered, her smile soft like sunlight breaking through. I believed her. But Helen did not live long enough to see that word "great" turn into hollow ambition, packaged with hashtags and flaunted across social media. I scrolled through Sophie Grant's public famegram page. She had never felt shame in showing off. So-called charity events where dresses and backdrops overshadowed every real value. Her world was fake, yet it was built on real money and the backbone of others. 2 posts made me stop. The first was a handwritten list, boldly titled, Wedding Goals. The handwriting was neat, sharp, like a business plan. Make it look natural. Ensure at least one magazine covers it. Guests must elevate the brand. Not a single word about love, only strategy. The second post was a video. Sophie stood in layers of white silk, twirling in front of the mirror, Daniel peeking awkwardly behind her, his face stiff like a supporting actor. The caption hit me straight in the eyes. Daddy is indirectly paying for this party. I froze the frame right there, my hand gripping the mouse so tight it clicked sharply. I didn't need to scroll to know the comments below were full of laughing emojis and mocking words. A cruel joke, built on the sweat and sacrifices I had once poured out. My mind drifted back to the day Helen died. A small, simple funeral, exactly as she had wished. No lavish wreaths, only a few relatives and the steady rhythm of prayer. When everyone had left, only Daniel and I remained in the church, thick with the bitter scent of lilies. He turned to me, his voice flat but heavier than the toll of the bells. "You failed, Dad. You should have done more." I stood there, my hands gripping the cold pew, swallowing each word. I had sold the car, I had mortgaged, I had screamed myself hoarse, even begged on my knees to the insurance company just to buy Helen a few more days. Yet in his eyes, it was still not enough. In that moment, I heard the crack between father and son, and Sophie only needed to push slightly, and the fracture widened, spreading deeper with each passing day. The wind howled through the cracks of the door, dry leaves scratching against the glass, their mournful sound heavier than the ticking clock in the living room. On the screen, the cursor blinked endlessly like a heartbeat urging me on. I opened a blank document. Every keystroke, every line that appeared, felt like a cut into the curtain Daniel and Sophie were trying to pull over everything. The first line, short but heavy as a nail hammered into wood. Venue, Rose Hill Estate, 50% deposit, non-refundable. The second line, photography, Crystal Lens Studios, VIP list marked D+S. And finally, catering. Emerald Feast Catering. No late payments accepted. 3 details, 3 pressure points. Hit them correctly, and the whole frame would shake. The phone vibrating on the kitchen counter startled me, ringing out like metal dropped in an empty room. I glanced at the screen. An unknown number. I let it buzz until it stopped, then opened the voicemail. My hand clenched tight on the counter, veins rising, before I pressed play. "Mr. Cole, this is Gregory Shaw from Emerald Feast Catering. We're finalizing the details for the Cole Grant wedding. Just wanted to confirm your payment schedule since you're listed as the primary contact. Please call me back when convenient." Primary contact. The words echoed in my head, as clear as if Gregory were standing right there in the kitchen. Daniel hadn't just sent me the invoice. He had placed me in the role of bearing the weight so that whenever a vendor had a problem, they would call me first. He wanted me to both pay and shield. Yet in doing so, he had unknowingly placed in my hands a power he couldn't even see. I leaned back, the chair creaking, eyes scanning the kitchen. The paint on the walls was faded, the wooden counters scarred, but everything here was real. Helen and I had chosen every doorknob, every coat of paint together. It wasn't grand, it wasn't glamorous, but it was real life. And it was this truth that would pull Daniel back, not the glass castle Sophie built. Before I closed the laptop, a memory surged back. Daniel at 13, holding a hammer far too big for him, wobbling as he drove crooked nails into the planks of a half-finished treehouse. After several failed attempts, he dropped onto the unfinished floor, legs dangling. He looked up at me, eyes shining with sincerity. "Dad, this is ours, right? No one else can interfere. No one else gets to decide what we do with it." That day I had smiled, ruffled his hair, and replied, That's right, son. That's the meaning. And now, the bitter irony is that he has forgotten his own lesson. I picked up the pocket watch from the mantel. It was still warm under the afternoon sun, the silver chain worn smooth after so many years of holding. I twisted the crown, listening to the clicks echo like the stiff joints of an old body settling back into place. Time. That was the only weapon I had left, and whoever knew how to wait always had the advantage. I slid it into my pocket, took the envelope from beneath it, and returned to the kitchen table. Once again, I spread out the papers, but this time not to read the numbers, but to see them as if they were technical blueprints. They were no longer bills, but the structural diagrams of a vain construction. And with every construction, there is always a weakness. The only question is finding the right joint, loosening a single screw, and watching the whole frame collapse. The light outside the porch turned golden, shadows stretching across the backyard. In that stillness, one name rose in my mind, clearer than any line of text on the paper: Nathan Price. Not just an old acquaintance. Nathan was a memory. I remembered those summer afternoons when Daniel and Nathan knelt by the kitchen table, gluing strips of balsa wood for the science fair. Helen laughed, setting down a tray of lemonade, the clinking ice sounding like wind chimes. Nathan was different from Daniel. The boy had eyes for the small details others overlooked: a hairline crack on a baseball bat, a loose link on the swing chain. Daniel was hot-tempered, impatient, but Nathan observed quietly. Maybe that's exactly why today I needed him. I opened the laptop and typed in Nathan's name. The results appeared: a modest website, a few photos on social media, portraits, a small wedding, some corporate shoots. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just real. There was an email address and a phone number. I chose the phone number. I entered the digits, gripping the phone tightly. It buzzed in my hand, rang once, then twice. I almost thought I would only reach voicemail. Then, a deep, gravelly voice came through, far older than in my memory. Nathan Price. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. That voice carried the weight of hills and valleys Daniel had never known. Nathan, it's Richard. I didn't add the words Mr. Cole. They weren't necessary. Both of us had gone far enough in life to leave formalities behind. A sharp inhale came through the receiver. Richard, I was just thinking about you. Never mind. How have you been? I'm doing better, I replied, glancing at the clock on the mantel, ticking steadily like an old friend. Do you have a minute for me? Yes. There was a pause. I gathered all the tangled truths into one simple sentence. Daniel won't let me attend his wedding, I said slowly, but he sent me a bill for $125,000 to pay for it. The venue, the catering, the dress, everything. Nathan let out a low, drawn-out whistle, as if trying to fill the silence. That sounds exactly like the version of Daniel I've seen lately. In that moment, I realized Nathan wasn't just Daniel's old friend. He understood, and he was angry on my behalf. I don't want to fight with him, I said, and I truly meant it. I want to teach him a lesson he will never forget, in my own way. I told Nathan Price everything. Rose Hill Estate with its 50% non-refundable deposit, Crystal Lens Studios with the VIP list clearly marked D+S, and Emerald Feast Catering, the place that had called me because I was listed as the primary contact. I heard the firmness in my voice and realized I was slipping back into the old rhythm of construction work. Define the limits, calculate the load, then strike precisely at the weakest joint of the structure. Nathan let out a quiet laugh, that same familiar sound from years ago, exactly like the time the two of us had just finished building the treehouse, after he had carefully checked every single nail. That treehouse stood through 2 storms, I said. That wasn't an accident. We hammered plenty of nails wrong, but every crack was sealed with patience. It wasn't perfect, but it endured, because it was built with what Daniel now despises: responsibility. Nathan was silent for a moment, then his voice shifted lower, steadier. carrying the focus of a man used to facing reality. "What do you need?" "I need eyes, ears, and photographs when required. I need someone who understands how Rose Hill Estate operates and how people like Crystal Lens Studios think." "I've shot at Rose Hill a few times," he replied. "They're rigid. The manager, Clara Jensen, only cares about deadlines. If the money doesn't arrive, the wedding doesn't happen. And Crystal Lens," Nathan hesitated, "they're like glass, obsessed with light, obsessed with reflection. The moment there's a crack, they worry more about the angle than the repair." I smiled, though no one could see. "Shall we meet? I want to talk this through." "Mapleleaf Cafe, Riverbend Avenue," Nathan said. 30 minutes. "No. Make it 40. I have a call to make first." "To whom?" Nathan asked. "The planner," I said, "the one who thinks this party belongs to him." The Hayes and Company events office looked exactly as I had pictured from the website, if not more so. It resembled a staged photograph. The polished wood desk gleaming like a mirror. Magazine covers framed neatly as if they were credentials to flaunt, and orchids tilted at perfect angles as though choreographed. Every detail whispered the same message. Here, nothing was accidental. When the assistant put me through, his voice came on. "This is Victor Hayes." A deep voice, compressed with authority, the tone of a man accustomed to clients who believed that one signature and one check could buy everything. "Good morning, Richard Cole," I began. "My name is on the invoice for the Cole Grant wedding at Rose Hill Estate." "Ah, Mr. Cole, we've been awaiting your payment schedule. I just spoke with Sophie over a week ago. What a delight." "I won't take much of your time," I cut in, my tone calm but sharp enough to make anyone sit straighter. "I'm the primary contact, and there's a misunderstanding to clear up. Daniel and Sophie have banned me from attending the wedding. I won't be there, yet they've sent invoices listing me as if there were an agreement. No such agreement exists." A thin silence followed, then a faint cough on the other end. "I'm not aware of such an arrangement." "I'll meet each vendor directly," I said firmly. "I won't pay a single cent for anything I haven't approved. If you assume otherwise, you'll soon find those assumptions have no foundation to stand on." His words slowed, the cadence changing. "Understood. I'll ensure nothing proceeds without confirmation and payment in hand." "Good," I said. "And here's my rule. Do not treat Daniel's messages as approval. Do not treat Sophie's emails as consent. You will only receive my authorization in writing. Without that, there will be nothing." He inhaled, then exhaled lightly, the sound of a professional recalculating. "Mr. Cole, off the record, this actually aligns with some early warning signs. Deadlines treated as suggestions. It's a relief to have clarity." "I'm a builder," I replied evenly. "Clarity is always cheaper than the cost of correction." On the other end, silence lingered, the kind of silence from a man used to giving orders, only to realize he had just met someone immovable. I hung up before he could muster a polite thank you. In the reflection of the microwave glass, the image staring back was just an old man with silver hair, wearing a worn shirt, seated in a tidy kitchen. But I knew better. The dominoes had already begun to tremble. Maple Leaf Cafe carried the faint aroma of rich roasted coffee and a hint of vanilla lingering from the morning's batch of pastries. Exposed brick walls held a few paintings, while in one corner the soft tapping of a keyboard hummed. Yet the entire atmosphere was wrapped in a cocoon of stillness, sealing in our conversation. Nathan Price was already seated at the corner table, his camera bag tucked beneath the chair, both hands gripping a coffee cup. He rose the instant he saw me, moving half a step quicker as though afraid I might change my mind and walk away. The hug was brief but tight, the scent of coffee clinging to his jacket. For someone like Nathan, not prone to physical contact, that squeeze felt like a silent vow. We sat down. The window beside us framed rows of trees shifting from green to gold. I felt a quiet relief that at least something outside wasn't false. Nathan leaned toward me. "So tell me, where do you want the first crack? We're not no men are on the first crack. We're not no men are on the first crack. Not a crack, I replied. Just bend it enough for the surface to spiderweb, and when they try to polish it back to perfection, their hands will slip. Nathan let out a soft laugh, then pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket. His pen moved quickly across the page. Eyes lit up not with ambition, but with the glow of someone who had finally found a purpose worth giving his energy to. "All right then," I said, my voice steady and precise, as if I were reading a plan. "First, I need the timeline of Rosehill Estate, which doors open before the ceremony, who is responsible for what, and when the final deadlines are. Second, I want to know the weak point of Crystal Lens Studios. They're about to release a bulletin, possibly even a big feature. If they catch the scent of potential negative press, they'll overreact to compensate. Third, Emerald Feast Catering has reached out to me. I haven't confirmed anything yet. I want to watch and see what kind of opportunity that gap might create." Nathan nodded and began jotting notes. "The delivery schedule at Rosehill I can handle. Clara Jensen runs that place like air traffic control. Everything passes through her eyes. But I also know a gardener there, Margaret Hill. She's a talker. She'll spill a few real stories. As for Crystal Lens Studios, I can track their tagged posts. That crowd gossips faster than they can even click their shutters," Nathan said, pausing for a moment. "I should say this plainly." Nathan set his spoon down on the table. "The last real conversation I had with Daniel Cole was when he asked me to write a fake reference letter. He said it was the language of the modern world. I refused. He wasn't angry, just gave that little smirk, like I was naive, incapable of grasping how this game is played. And that's when I knew we no longer spoke the same language." "You were right," I told him. Nathan smiled, though his eyes were empty. "Being right doesn't pay the bills." "I can't pay much," I answered, "but it will be fair." He shook his head. "If this pulls Daniel back even just a few steps closer to a version of himself he won't despise at 50. That's enough. Besides, I enjoy puzzles. Send me the list." I slid a folded paper across the table. On it, Emerald Feast Catering, Crystal Lens Studios, Rosehill Estate. Beneath them, a few smaller names, Petal Bloom Designs, and a boutique linen company with a name that sounded like perfume. Nathan leaned back in his chair, blowing lightly over his coffee, as if to digest it all. "They're going big. This isn't a wedding anymore, Richard. This is a sugar-coated marketing campaign." "This isn't a wedding," I said. "This is a film set, and they're performing without realizing the audience already swapped the script." Nathan laughed, low and steady, his pen tapping a rhythm against the table. "Then we won't just turn off the lights. We'll pull the whole backdrop down." The last light of day stretched across the floor. Tiny dust particles floated in the beam, making me feel as if even time itself had paused, waiting for my decision before moving forward. I traced a line in the light with my finger, as though sketching in the air. I sat down at the table and reopened the stack of invoices. At this point, I no longer looked at the numbers, only at the sequence. With a pencil, I crossed through each item, like a surgeon locating the exact joint. Venue, deposit, insurance, security. Next, electricity, temporary boards, permits. Then the exterior, flowers, tablecloths, lighting. Finally, the story, photos, video, social media. In any structure, if you find the right beam hidden behind the walls and pull it out, the entire frame collapses. I was still deep in thought when the phone buzzed a message from Adrian Blake. "As discussed, I am only waiting for written approval. Rosehill Estate requires additional insurance and proof of payment before the end of next weekend. If not, the event date will return to provisional status." Provisional. That word blinked in my mind longer than necessary, striking at the secret fear of a father. I replied, "Understood. No representatives accepted other than me." I set the phone down. Suddenly, the house recalled those old Sunday afternoons. Soup boiling on the stove, Helen Cole's voice softly humming. Now, only the ticking of the clock remained a substitute heartbeat. I walked to the fireplace. The pocket watch lay there, its brass catching the last sunlight. I picked it up, feeling its weight and the warmth of the metal. I wound it gently, just as my father had taught me when I was 9 years old. Never force it, listen for the catch, and respect the mechanism. The phone rang. Daniel Cole. I let it go 5 times before answering, not out of anger, but to reset the rhythm so he would be short of breath when I picked up. "Dad." His voice came smooth, too smooth. "I heard from Adrian already. Why are you interfering?" "My name is listed as the primary contact," I replied. "I'm only clarifying what that means." He hesitated, then chuckled dryly. "I get it. You're helping, like you promised." "That day, help came from love," I said slowly. "Now, it feels like sponsorship just to keep up appearances." The air tightened. "Sophie Grant and I have standards. Our friends do too." I remembered the way his eyes once lit up over nothing more than an old basketball. I gripped the pocket watch tighter, as though bracing my endurance. "True friends don't need a stage to understand love," I said. "If they do, they aren't friends." His voice hardened. "Adrian says we need the insurance rider. You'll cover it." "He's only waiting for paperwork." "Adrian will receive it," I answered. "From me. Or not at all." "Sophie won't like that." "Then Sophie can call me. She's busy." "I'm retired, but not idle." He let out a short laugh, a crack in his armor. "You're still as stubborn as ever." "Not stubborn, steady. The difference is people can lean on steady." His tone shifted, softer. "Listen, Dad, this is important. Big guests, media coverage too." "I know. Crystal Lens Studios." "Smart move. I'm not selling anything, just throwing a party." "Number, you're building a stage." The facade cracked. "What's your problem? You should be grateful we're even letting you be part of this." Grateful. That word again. I suddenly remembered the paper cup of coffee in the hospital, remembered my own dried-out signature under the yellow lamp at midnight. "I am grateful," I replied, "for the clarity." "Clarity about what?" "I need to know exactly what my money is being used for. I will not sign any check without that." "You have to pay, because you're my father." "I am your father," I said, "but paying is a different matter." He inhaled sharply, as if waiting for a script but none came. "I'll let Sophie call," he muttered irritably, then hung up. I set the phone down and looked at my reflection in the mirror. Neither victory nor defeat, only resolve. I boiled water, and just as I touched the tea packet, the phone rang again. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. "Clara Jensen from Rosehill Estate. We have not received the final payment. If not completed, the schedule will be tentatively moved to late Saturday. Please confirm." I smiled faintly. The universe favors no one, it simply runs its course. I messaged Nathan Price. "Clara just called. Saturday is the pivot point. Can you hold the load schedule that day?" 3 dots blinked. "On it. Margaret Hill reminds you. The generator requires payment 72 hours in advance, or Rosehill Estate cuts the power after sunset." I replied, "Good. Darkness simplifies the truth." He sent back only a single dot, our old code. Understood. Nathan's text, detailed logistics. I read it like an officer studying a battle map. Each hour, each item, was a coordinate. And if executed correctly, it wouldn't lead to a wedding, but to the truth. The kettle whistled. I poured the water, letting it seep slowly through the tea leaves. Outside, night fell quickly. I turned on the porch light and watched moths hurl themselves into its glow. A car pulled up to the mailbox, then drove away. I wrote 3 lines, slow as carving into wood. Saturday is the turning point. Only in the dark do we see clearly. Do not adjust the surface. Change the foundation. I circled the last line, folded the paper, creased it hard like dropping a gavel, and slid it beneath the keyboard. The lights clicked off. The fireplace roared to life for the first time this season. The house remembered how to keep me warm. In the darkness, my eyes stayed open, but my mind had already arranged itself. Not the silence of surrender, but the silence of a man who finally knows exactly which bolt to tighten and has at last picked up the wrench. Before leaving the house, I gently touched the photo frame of Helen Cole on the shelf, like a soldier brushing his badge before a battle. On the porch, I adjusted the wooden chair to sit straight, a small habit, but one that eased my mind. In my pocket, the pocket watch gave a faint vibration, and the envelope pressed against my chest felt like a sealed command. At 8:15, I started the car. Ashford City at the end of November wore its honest face. Trees along the road already spotted with bare branches, the sky streaked like an old linen cloth. A woman walked her dog past the familiar bakery. For a moment, I recalled an afternoon when Daniel Cole was little, insisting on that glossy golden cake, then smearing it all over his face. The memory appeared, then vanished in the rearview mirror. At 9:32, I turned onto the long road leading to Rosehill Estate. From the gates onward, the place was designed to appear effortless. Wisteria vines climbed gracefully like a scene from a film, rows of white columns lined up like polite smiles. Yet at one corner of the wall, I still saw a crack, a few dry leaves trapped beneath the steps. Money knows how to polish, but it also knows how to tire. I parked beneath an old tree, yellow leaves falling like confetti, then texted, "I'm here." Nathan Price replied instantly, "South Garden, 9:45. If anyone asks, just say I'm a landscape consultant." I smiled. He appeared minutes later, neutral-colored coat, neatly pressed, clean-shaven. In his hand was a folded checklist, stained with old coffee marks, a real tool, not a prop. His eyes scanned the garden quickly, sharp as a hunter familiar with his terrain. This was a man who knew how to dress for every setting. I stood quietly for a few seconds. Amid the calm rhythm, a metallic clang suddenly rang out, then was quickly swallowed by an awkward silence. Every system has its leaks. The office lay deep in the back, apart from the showy foyer, just as money and security always prefer to stay close to the kitchen and the books. I entered through the staff corridor, where a man who could carry 3 folding chairs in each hand asked if Clara Jensen was inside. He didn't ask my name, only pointed the way through a hallway lined with magazine covers praising someone else's happiness. Clara was exactly as Nathan described, hair tied in a neat bun, tablet in hand, eyes constantly shifting as if tallying counts. A pen tucked behind her ear, a cup of coffee on the desk, long gone cold. When she looked up, she offered a professional smile. It could mean, "Good morning," or it could mean, "Don't complicate my day." "You must be Mr. Cole." "That's right." We shook hands. Her palm was cold and dry, as if just pulled from a refrigerator. She didn't sit down, only gestured slightly toward the chair in front of the desk, a signal that the conversation would not last long. "I received your voicemail," I began. "And my confirmation email as well," she replied. "The addendum and the final authorization must be in by Friday, otherwise the event will move into provisional status." I nodded. "Let's be clear. From now on, every document must bear my signature. I will not approve anything else." She typed quickly on her tablet, then looked up, eyes sharp as glass. "Understood." From my pocket, I drew a sheet of paper printed on old stationery. The words on it were still firm, decisive. I placed it on the desk. "This is the official authorization. No invoice is valid without my signature." She skimmed it, then set her stylus down as if to hold the page in place. The tip trembled slightly, as though even it sensed the weight. "Thank you, Mr. Cole." I continued, "If by Saturday the event remains provisional, what will happen?" "We have backup slots for the weekend. Another company is waiting for confirmation. At that point, the organizers would have to either choose another time or pay an emergency fee." "Good." I nodded. "It's always useful to know the ground ahead." Clara studied me a little longer. This time her voice softened beneath the professional tone. "Mr. Cole, are you trying to sabotage this wedding?" I stayed silent for a few seconds, watching my own blurred reflection spread across the glass surface of the desk, then answered slowly. I'm not sabotaging anything, I'm only stripping off the polish. A wedding that cannot stand the true light isn't worth taking place." She held my gaze for longer than half a second, a pause long enough to serve as a period at the end of a sentence. "We will wait for your written approval." We stood. No pleasantries. None were necessary. Sometimes, bluntness is more polite than any courteous phrase. On the way out, I passed a glass door that opened to the south garden. Behind the clear pane, 4 figures appeared exactly as I had anticipated. 2 representatives from Crystal Lens Studios in identical black jackets, their smiles identical as well, and a woman clutching a foam core board against her side. Sophie Grant. Her beige outfit was both elegant and form-fitting, the kind of refinement whose true worth could only be captured in a photograph. Next to her, Daniel Cole looked as though he had stepped straight out of a startup magazine, jeans, sneakers, and a blazer. I could have turned away, letting the glass serve as a barrier, but I stepped outside. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes, loud enough to make them turn. Sophie recognized me first, then Daniel. In that brief moment, their faces shifted, from relief that the one who was supposed to show up has arrived, to instant tension at realizing that the one who had arrived was me. Daniel froze mid-step, his sneaker catching on the gravel. Sophie lifted her chin slightly, her smile touching her lips but never her eyes. Both tried to project confidence, but the tremor at the corners of their mouths betrayed them. "Richard," Sophie spoke, as though addressing an old acquaintance. "Dad," Daniel said, but the word fell from his mouth without finding a place to land. I turned to the 2 from Crystal Lens Studios. Professionals deserved courtesy. "Good morning." The taller one extended a hand. "Survey day. I'm Tessa Moore, this is Liam Carter. We're choosing angles for the shoot." "Angles," I said, shaking the hand. "Always good to know where the light falls." Tessa gave Sophie a quick glance, then continued. "We plan to hold the ceremony on the south lawn, with photos on the terrace. If the guest access can be controlled, we'll be able to frame a beautiful shot from the steps." "Control is essential," Sophie interjected. I asked, casually, as though making small talk. "And power supply? I heard a generator is needed for the evening lights." Tessa blinked briefly. "We're not in charge of power." "Adrian is handling that," Sophie cut in, decisively, as though to close the subject. "He already confirmed." I looked directly at Daniel. He bent to adjust his cuff, pretending to focus on a loose thread rather than meet his father's eyes. In that avoidance, I saw the child who once tried to hold on to a kite after the string had already snapped, hands trembling, but still pretending to be in control. "Richard," Sophie called again, with that familiar tone of someone who always believed she could steer the conversation. "We need your signature on the addendum today." "You will have my signature on whatever I approve," I replied curtly. "Today, I'm only here to observe." The air tightened. Tessa looked up, sensing the shift in temperature though not knowing where the wind had turned. "We could begin on the terrace." "Go ahead," I stepped back. They moved together as a group, Tessa explaining, Liam marking positions, Sophie trailing half a step behind like a guide. Daniel walked faster than necessary, the stride of someone trying to outpace the truth. On the terrace, the reflecting pool gleamed as though freshly polished. Liam lifted his camera to test the frame. Tessa pointed to the hedge, speaking of negative space. Sophie nodded. Tessa gestured. "Stand together, like this." Sophie immediately leaned toward Daniel, resting her hand lightly on his arm, exactly like a scene from a bridal magazine. Daniel smiled. In the frame, they looked like the perfect couple. But from the outside, I could see the cold emptiness between them, the kind of space no lens could ever capture. Beyond the low wall, a maintenance truck had stopped. Nathan Price stepped out. His cap seemed heavier than usual. He bent to pick up a cable, pretending to check it, then tilted his head slightly toward the service door behind the fence. A small sign, but I understood. That was the exit without cameras. Tessa raised her hand to catch the sunlight. We'll need candles along the railing. If the wind cooperates, we could add diffusers. I muttered. Generators are noisy, unless you rent the quiet kind, which you don't have. Sophie turned back. Excuse me? Quiet generators are expensive. Your supplier doesn't carry them. But never mind. Perhaps you'll enjoy the humming sound drowning out the vows. Daniel's jaw twitched. We'll handle it. You will, I said. Or not. Either way, you'll learn. Just then, an employee from Rosehill Estate approached, whispering something to Clara Jensen. I caught fragments. Deadline. By noon. She didn't look at me, but her hand tightened around the pen for one extra beat. Later, when I returned to the car, I sat still with my hands on the wheel. My phone buzzed. A message from Nathan. Sent you the survey notes. Also snapped a shot when Tessa told them to act natural. But it wasn't natural. You'll see. I replied. I always see. 2 tasks. First, confirm the payment structure with the generator vendor. Second, check if Emerald Feast Catering has another event that weekend they'd prioritize if this one falls through. He answered. The operations guy at Emerald Feast, Gregory Shaw, plays softball with my cousin. I'll buy him some liquor. He'll talk. Get him some food, too, I texted back. I didn't start the car immediately. The breeze slipped through the cracked window. On the hood, a dragonfly landed, its thin wings catching the light like glass. It lingered for a second, then flew away, carrying nothing but itself. I thought, freedom isn't about breaking or clinging. Freedom is knowing you don't need to hold on to what could never truly be kept. Returning home, I was greeted by familiar sounds, the steady tick of the wall clock, the low hum of the refrigerator, and the dry click of the thermostat waking the heater. I set the pocket watch on the mantel, the envelope beneath it like a brick pinning shingles against the wind. My fingers tapped unconsciously against the cold metal. These repetitive habits were nothing less than an anchor. When the whole ship sways, you cling to whatever certainty remains. I made a cup of coffee I didn't need, just for the warmth filling the silent kitchen. Then I opened Nathan Price's email. The PDF loaded. Red arrows sprawled across it like the map of a military campaign. Crystal lens studios, transport routes, power sources, lighting angles, even the small italic note weather risk, like a casual reminder. Nathan wasn't just observing, he was sketching a battlefield. Finally, a frame. Daniel Cole and Sophie Grant standing close together on the steps, looking natural. But I saw the pretense immediately, 2 arms hanging limp, not touching. A duet, but no spontaneous gesture breaking the script. The phone buzzed, a voicemail. I played it on speaker, still scrolling through the email. Mr. Cole, this is Gregory Shaw from Golden Plate Catering, calling back to follow up on the payment schedule. We're adjusting staffing for that weekend, so if we don't have confirmation by midweek, we may need to reshuffle the team. Please return the call when you can. Plus. His voice was even, but behind it lingered the scent of money, schedules, pressure. I pressed my palm flat against the kitchen table, the grain cold beneath my skin, and for a moment I felt like some aging accountant, not the father of the groom. That thought twisted inside me, but I didn't let it root. I called back immediately. Gregory, I said when he answered, Richard Cole here. Let's be clear, only written approval from me is valid. Understood? Understood. You're the primary decision maker, he replied. Second, I continued, if you have to change the serving team, how does that impact my son's event? Could mean slower service, or a different team. Worst case, if the budget isn't met, we'd have to withdraw. Understood, I said. If that happens, do what's reasonable. I won't hold you to a promise someone else made. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. Off the record? Go ahead. He's too easygoing, Gregory said, like if he stares at the calendar long enough, it'll shift by itself. I gave a short laugh. not from amusement. The calendar won't, I replied, but people will. Gregory's voice stalled for a beat, then slipped back into professional politeness. We ended the call with courtesy. At 5:10 p.m., a message came from Adrian Blake. Need the final approval list before Thursday at the latest to coordinate vendor payments. Sophie's pressing me for confirmation. I typed, deleted, typed again, sweat smudging faint streaks across the screen. Every word felt like dropping a stone into a rushing river. I had to place it carefully, or it would be swept away. At last, I wrote, we stay with what was agreed, send a consolidated list, remove unnecessary frills, keep structural essentials, no speculative orders. His reply came at once. Got it. Cutting extras, special linens, drone filming, keeping power, kitchen staff. We'll send revised list. 2 minutes later, he added, Silverwood Manor just reported another corporate hold. I told Sophie and she's worried. I typed, worrying is a step toward maturity, then deleted it. It sounded like a father lecturing a child. But the truth was, Sophie had never worried. She was used to commanding. And now, for the first time, she was tasting unease. I sent only, noted, a waiting list. The sun slid across the living room wall, landing on a frame, Daniel at 8 years old, holding up a fish so absurdly small yet lifting it like a prize. Helen had taken the photo, her shadow faint in the corner like an invisible signature. I brushed a fingertip across the glass, the dust cold against my skin. Some things you never sign off on, yet they remain yours. I poured another cup of coffee and drank it down. The bitterness pleased me. It reminded me that this mouth, at least, was still mine. Evening fell faster than I expected. I pulled on a sweater and stepped outside to gather the tools left by the shed. The sudden chill struck, carrying the scent of damp soil and rusted iron. I picked up the hammer, the wrench, setting them neatly into the box. The faint clang of metal echoed softly, like chess pieces being cleared before a new match. Night often signals the seasons of change more clearly than the day. The chill clung to the steering wheel as I pulled the car into the garage. The phone buzzed in my coat pocket. The screen lit up. Daniel Cole. I hesitated for a moment before answering. His voice rushed into my ear, urgent, a little shaky. Dad, all afternoon people have been whispering about you. They said you wrecked the meeting at Silverwood Manor. Each word he spoke landed like a hammer on my chest, like sealing a verdict against a troublemaker. I just showed up, I said slowly. I didn't do anything. You embarrassed us in front of the vendors. I simply redefined the terms in front of professionals, I replied. That's called negotiation. On the other end, he let out a faint groan, the sound I knew well from when he used to wear his baseball jersey, missing a swing by an inch and then sitting still, defeated. Still the same boy, except now he thought he was grown, wrapped in a suit. Listen, Daniel snapped, we need the rider, the generators, the kitchen team's confirmation. You're not just asking for those, I said. You're handing me an invoice and demanding a check. He inhaled sharply. You're enjoying this, aren't you? The familiar line. Whenever he needed me to play the villain so his story stayed neat, he always asked that. If I were enjoying it, I smirked, I'd have brought popcorn to your scouting practice. Silence. Then his voice returned, smaller, more fragile. Why are you doing this to us? I stepped out onto the back porch, letting the cold wind sting my face. My hand tightened around the phone. Because you send me invoices as if I'm a walking ATM. Because you forgot I patched every leaking roof so you had a place to sleep. Because Helen Cole is gone, and you're building a castle out of borrowed money and calling it the future. And because I told you already you can't learn gravity by reading a book, you have to let it pull you down at least once. I heard him laugh, a short, hollow burst, like someone swallowing ice too quickly to hide their trembling. An old habit, whenever he feared losing but wanted to appear winning. Doesn't make any sense, he muttered. Then I heard the smirk in his voice again, as if he was clawing for ground. Fine, I said firmly. Saturday is the hinge. If you want the light, you first need to learn to see in the dark." He fell silent, only his ragged breathing mingling with the wind whistling through the glass. 3 breaths, 1 hesitation, 1 frustration, 1 resignation. Then his voice came back, older than his years. "I'll tell Sophie Grant to send the list." "Good," I answered. When the call ended, I stood on the steps, letting the cold do its work, tightening everything back to its true shape. Out there, somewhere beyond the trees, a siren tore through the night, then dissolved. The neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm, quiet, dignified, ordinary. Inside, I found a pen, the same one that once signed important checks, and set it beside the pocket watch on the mantel. I pulled a sheet of paper and drew a straight line down the middle, necessary and extravagant. Under necessary, I wrote electricity, kitchen, insurance, basic lighting. Under extravagant, drones, linens, quartet, publication package. I drew arrows, from necessary to honor, from extravagant to noise. Not because beauty doesn't matter. Helen once believed that even the right-colored tablecloth could turn an ordinary dinner into a memory. But she also understood. A house needs a firm foundation before it needs curtains. Beauty has value, but it can't save a rotting structure. The fireplace cracked softly, like a word of reassurance. The pocket watch ticked steadily. The house kept its promise. Shelter, warmth, patience, in a world obsessed with display. The next morning, the envelope arrived just after 9. It slid through the door with a cold scratch, like someone striking a name off a list. Thick, heavy, stamped with the logo, Hayes and Company. Events, approvals and seating packet, in sharp red letters labeled Rush at the corner. I tore it open. On top was a seating chart, full color, laminated, 15 perfect round tables. Sophie's parents and friends filled the first 3, a wall of honor. Executives, colleagues, a few influencers, the next tables. I ran my finger slowly across the diagram, like feeling for a pulse. No Dad, no Richard Cole, no Mr. Cole, not even an extra chair in the back. I wasn't there. I had been erased. Beneath the chart, clipped in gold, was the contract. Rider, generators, kitchen staff, premium linen package that read like perfume, and a separate page. Publication package. Crystal Lens Studios preferred list. In parentheses at the bottom, proposed exclusives pending sponsor alignment. I pressed my thumb hard against the page, enough to warm the glossy coating beneath my skin. The house still hummed its familiar chorus, the fridge, the faint knock in the pipes, everything still ordinary. But I wasn't. The phone buzzed. A text from Adrian Blake, approvals packet sent via courier, kindly signed by EOD to avoid rush fees. Sophie would appreciate timing here. Attached was the same PDF. Cheerful words, but beneath them lay the trap of rush charges. I sipped cold coffee, letting its bitterness speak for me. Then I spread the seating chart on the table, studying it as I once studied load diagrams, searching for weak points, for the place where everything would collapse when the force shifted. Pen in hand, the landline rang. I let it go 2 cycles before picking up. "Mr. Cole?" A bright, efficient voice. "Isabel Cruz, from the Rose Hill Estate office. Confirming the packet. Adrian said you received it?" "Yes." "Perfect. We'll be locking the seating chart by 4 p.m. Friday so the crew can arrange the tables. Any objections?" "Yes." I paused long enough for her to wonder. "All right." Her tone softened, still professional. "Noted. Would you like to send your revisions, or let the planner decide?" "I'll send it in writing. And Isabel, mark every document as unapproved until it carries my signature." "Of course." "Good," I said, and hung up. I turned the envelope over and drew 3 columns. Necessary, nice, noise. Rider, generators, kitchen team necessary. Linens, publication package, noise. But then I moved linens up 1 row, into Nice. Because in memory, Helen still whispered, "Not all beauty is a lie." The seating chart? I left it out. It wasn't an item. It was a statement. A cold cut through what was once called family. Across the room, my father's pocket watch caught a beam of sunlight, casting it against the wall. I stepped over and lifted the pocket watch. The minute hand twitched as I wound it, a small click sounding in the quiet room like a heartbeat restarting. I slipped it into my jacket pocket, and when the ground around no longer felt steady, when everything shook, a man had to keep with him something that would not. I called Nathan Price. "Maple Leaf," he said instead of hello. 10 minutes, I replied. "I'll be there before you," he said and hung up. Outside, November had broken open with a decisive cold that made people instinctively reach for coats. I drove, lowering the window just a crack. Cold air slapped in, carrying the smell of gasoline mixed with the scent of dry leaves. I listened to the neighborhood breathe, a dog barking, the long squeal of a bus brake, wind chimes clinking together. The whole block seemed to signal, something is about to change. Maple Leaf was quiet. Nathan was already seated in the corner, notebook open, handwriting neat. He handed me a photograph without a word. Tessa Moore must have sent the test shots. In the frame, Daniel Cole and Sophie Grant stood on the steps of Rose Hill Estate. Elbows nearly touched but not quite, eyes parallel like two rails that never met. Tessa had wanted to catch something natural, but the lens had only held rehearsal. "I know," Nathan said softly. "Any information about the generator supplier?" I asked. "Titan Energy Rentals. For corporate clients it's net 30. Personal events must pay 72 hours in advance. They reserve the machines like bookings, but the trucks don't roll unless you pay extra for the quiet units. And they don't have many quiet ones." "Good," I nodded. "Noise is more real, and truth always shows itself that way. No filter, no edit, only reality echoing." Nathan made a note, then tapped lightly on the seating chart I had just slid over. He looked up, finger stopping. "They've erased you from the paperwork," he said, his voice colder than the November wind. "They'll grow careless too," I replied, "and that's a kind of mercy." He leaned back, inhaled deeply. "At this point I must ask, what line will you cross, and what line will you not? No sabotage, no staging tricks, no lies to prove truth. If anything flares, it's only because their own wiring sparks." He nodded, satisfied. "Good. Then we'll only push gently where it's already weak. Let the schedule do the rest. And we'll remind everyone how to behave properly." "Even if they don't choose to," I added. He smiled, the first real smile of the day. "Gregory Shaw said Emerald Feast Catering is rotating staff," Nathan continued. "If you don't sign today, Team 2 will be reassigned to the hospital gala. That puts Daniel's service window at risk. Adrian will have to prioritize. Apply that pressure now or tomorrow." "Tomorrow," I said. "Today they still believe the story. Tomorrow they'll face the truth." Nathan turned to a new page. "What can I take off your hands?" "Get me the latest Rose Hill schedule with the corporate reception. If they switch from soft hold to firm hold, I want to know immediately. And check if Crystal Lynn Studios has signed with any media partner yet." He jotted, tore a corner from the page, slid it over to me, a list of numbers and symbols needing no explanation. "I'll call at 3, he said. "Call Adrian, after lunch," I added. "Let it sink in." We stopped there. He packed up his camera bag, leaving the notebook cleared of pages. I held the seating chart, deliberately folding it once, so the laminate crackled. I tucked it into my jacket pocket like a stiff, thin bone. On the way home, I stopped at a print shop and made a copy. Sitting at the table, I laid down a black pen like setting a scalpel. I wrote my name in the blank space where any decent person would have placed me, and beneath it I wrote, Helen Cole. No table number, no name card, just black ink on white paper, like carving on stone, useless to the world, but necessary to a heart that once knew what family was. The phone rang. "Daniel." "Dad, we need to lock in a few things," Adrian said. "Rose Hill needs the rider, generator supplier. I've read the documents." "Good, then you can just..." "Number," his word cut in, tight as a wrench on a bolt. "No, you can't just sign it through. I'll approve what makes sense structurally. Anything that only makes noise, only puts on a show, I'll strike. This is a wedding, not a carnival. Noisy, he tried to laugh. This is a wedding, Dad. It has to be beautiful. Beauty doesn't need a media package, I replied. It doesn't need a drone. It doesn't need tablecloths more expensive than most people's rent. You don't have to be bitter, he said. For a moment the boy flickered, then the man returned. I'm just trying to keep everyone calm. Sophie is under a lot of pressure. You keep saying that, but you forget who creates the pressure. I'm not arguing anymore, he snapped. Just say you'll sign the rider. I'll sign the rider if you move me from erased to present. He fell silent. Not silence for calculation, but emptiness, where thought dropped and broke before forming words. Dad, the seating chart. That's the choice, I said. Everything is a choice. I'll talk to Sophie, he answered. You do that. I hung up before he could tie a bow on an empty gift. I typed an email to Adrian Blake, subject, Approvals clarification. Brief, proper. The kind of message from someone who already knew the outcome mattered. Proceed with rider, generator, and kitchen staff upon my signature. Remove upgrades for tablecloths, drone, and media package from the current list. Seating remains unresolved. No representative is authorized to sign in my place. The reply came almost instantly. Understood on removals. Will send revised list. Regarding seating, Sophie prefers to maintain current plan to ensure unified aesthetics. Unified aesthetics, I repeated, letting the words fall heavy. 3:30. Gregory Shaw from Emerald Feast Catering called. Quick update. The hospital gala wants Team 2 on Saturday. Without your signature by end of day, we'll have to reassign staff. Reassign? Meaning reduced service. He hesitated. Off the record, you might want to align expectations with the planner. I know, thanks for telling me. I texted Nathan. Emerald Feast's Team 2 may be pulled today. Good pressure. He replied, Rose Hill just switched soft hold to priority. Clara Jensen is waiting on the rider. Without it before Saturday noon, she'll push the reception into your slot. Perfect, I typed. Clarity down to detail. For an hour I did nothing remarkable. Just pulled leftovers from the fridge, washed the pan and set it to dry. Walked through each room, checked doors, straightened frames already straight. The house gave me small tasks to cling to. When storms come, a man must know exactly where the towel lies. 5:15. The doorbell rang 2 short, steady chimes, the kind from someone sure every door they knock will open. Sophie stood there, gray coat fitted close, lips painted pale pink, blending with the stretched glass blue sky about to crack. Richard, she said, precise smile not touching her eyes. We should talk. Fine, I nodded. In the kitchen. She walked in as though it belonged to her, sat at the table uninvited. I didn't pour coffee, didn't clear papers. She glanced at the pile, turned away, as if it were a language unreadable to her. I understand you want to feel involved, she began. I know it's not simple, but only a few days left, and Adrian needs certainty. Certainty is exactly what I'm showing, I replied. She pressed her hands into a small tower. Then say you'll sign what we need. I'll sign the rider. I'll sign power, food. I won't sign the drone. I won't sign tablecloths more expensive than most people's rent. I won't sign a media package so strangers can clap. Her smile thinned. This isn't about strangers. This is about our life, our community, what we're building together. What you're building is performance. Wanting a beautiful day is wrong. Wanting people to see us is wrong. Beauty isn't wrong, I said, but making it a shield is. Her gaze drifted to the fireplace, pausing at the pocket watch and a photo of Daniel at Cedarbrook Creek. I caught a flicker of recognition in her eyes, then it vanished. This house, it's cute, she said, like a compliment. But Daniel's life is different now. Our life is different. I know, I answered, but I didn't say the rest. That different now meant immunity, that we had grown selective, that cute was a softer word for not enough. She inhaled deeply, voice dispensing. We won't change the seating, it causes stress we don't have time for. You have 24 hours like everyone else. What you handle is your choice. I'm just trying to protect Daniel, she said. From what? I asked. From his father, or from the truth of what he'll become if no one ever dares tell him no? Her jaw tightened slightly, a detail subtle enough only someone watching for months would notice. You're not being rational. I'm being exact, I said. Rational is the label people give me when my boundaries cost them money. She rose. We'll resend the rider, sign tonight. I'll sign tomorrow morning, I said. I don't sign papers at sunset. She blinked, not because it was nonsense, but because it was too sensible, bending the line she wanted straight. At the door, she turned back. People will think you don't have the money. They'll be wrong, I said, and if not, I'll still get through. When she left, I locked the door, hand resting on the latch longer than habit. In the glass, kitchen lights glowed like ships on a dark sea. Nathan texted, Crystal Lens Studios just offered an exclusive package to a lifestyle blog. The blog agreed, as long as there was a compelling story. He attached a screenshot of the email, full of words like synergy, alignment, and one line that made me laugh. We envisioned the piece as looking effortless. I wrote back, tell them effort is the essence. Thank you. 7 o'clock, Adrian sent the revised list. As instructed, rider, generator, kitchen staff, other items removed. Please sign the rider before noon tomorrow to avoid disruption to Rose Hill's schedule. The attached PDF already had a signature box and the line, Authorized Party. I printed it, the page still warm from the machine. I set it down on the table, right beside the seating chart with 2 handwritten names, mine and Helen Cole. The paper was warm, but the ink was dry. I did not sign. The first light of morning spilled through the kitchen window, stretching my shadow across the worn tile floor. The chill from last night still lingered, carrying with it the faint scent of damp wood and dry metal. I spread the seating chart on the stove ledge, just beneath the pocket watch. Time lay there, like a silent witness, waiting to see whether my hands would still tremble this morning. The phone buzzed. 7:30 a.m. The name Daniel Cole appeared. I stared at the screen for a long beat, as though a single touch could determine the fate of an entire lifetime between father and son. Finally, I answered. His voice was rough, weary, as if after a night of arguments or sleeplessness. I heard from Sophie Grant that she went to see you. I know, I replied. She's right. You'll sign for the generators and the cooking stations. I nodded slightly, then pressed each word out. But the seating, that has to be signed by you. On the other end, silence. A hesitant breath, as though testing whether I was speaking in riddles or speaking plainly. Then he said, I can't move you to the family table. Like a stab. My mind leapt back to an old memory. He was still a boy, sitting beside me in the old truck, his small legs swinging, not yet reaching the floor. He asked, Dad, when I get married, where will you sit? I had laughed, ruffling his hair. Right where I belong beside you. Now the memory returned, cutting like a dull blade into my heart. You can, I replied slowly. You're just choosing not to. Don't hide the truth behind the word can't. Dad, his voice strained to keep steady. If you sit there, everyone will see. They'll see a rustic father at his son's wedding. If heat surged to my face, burning as though it would scorch my very skin. And if that makes you ashamed, then the problem isn't in the seating chart. The problem is in the man you're trying to perform as for the world to see. He drew in a deep breath, then exhaled heavily, as though pouring all his strength into a single decision. I will talk to Adrian. I answered at once, my voice cold as steel. I'm afraid you're only talking to yourself. Adrian works only for you. On the other end, silence. Only a faint sigh remained, fragile and distant, like wind slipping through a cracked window frame. I hung up. The screen stayed lit for a few more seconds, flickering like a final backward glance. I set it down on the table, my fingers brushing against the pocket watch. The hands moved steadily, unshaken, unwavering. Time itself seemed to confirm I had been right. I walked slowly, from room to room, turning off each light. Darkness entered, calm and unhurried, like an old guest who had never been invited. At last, only the living room remained lit, a small circle of light cast upon the worn wooden table. I stood in the doorway, watching the hands of the clock turn. Time flowed on, indifferent to the fractures within a human heart. In memory, I saw again the little boy who once clutched my hand by the riverbank, his eyes bright as he asked, "Dad, if I fell into the water, would you jump in to save me?" I laughed, squeezing that tiny hand tightly. I would never leave you alone. And yet now, it was he who had pushed me to the cold river's edge, leaving me adrift in the freezing current of distance. I remembered the man who once sent me a bill, its numbers sharp and merciless, as though fatherhood itself were nothing more than a monthly fee unpaid, and the service cut off like electricity, like water. And I remembered Helen. Her voice echoed in the old kitchen, as vivid as if she were still standing behind me. "You don't need to save him from every failure, only from the ones that will haunt him for a lifetime. One day, he will believe he's strong, that he needs no one. But it is in that moment he will need you most." I placed 2 envelopes on the table, one marked clearly, signed manuscript, the other, blank. I turned them over and over, as if weighing them on an invisible scale. By morning, one would leave this house, the other would remain, silently bearing witness to my choice. I did not yet know which it would be, but perhaps the true meaning lay not in certainty, but in holding on to what could be held, and leaving the rest for daylight to decide. I lay down, letting the darkness close over the room. There was no victory, no defeat. Only the steady rhythm of my heartbeat, like a hammer striking time, reminding me that tomorrow would come, and time has never stayed loyal to anyone for too long. Before going to bed, I opened the small notebook beside the phone. The pen hovered over the page, as if asking me in return, was it really necessary to write these lines? I stared into the blank space, letting the silence grow heavier on my wrist. At last, I pressed the pen down, and the ink bled into 3 short lines. "Choose bone, not brass. Midday is a cliff. If they want it easy, show them the effort." The pocket watch ticked steadily on the wooden surface, the second hand striking like an ally to the resolve pounding in my chest. I turned off the light. The house paid no mind to human worries, it only hummed with familiar sounds, the wind whistling through the cracks, the creak of old timber. I lay there, eyes open in the dark, breathing with every beat. Somewhere across the city, my son was likely practicing his smile in the mirror, straightening his tie, rehearsing gestures as though love itself could be staged. And that crowded room would applaud that version of him, a man loved for what he could provide. While I, in this house, prepared for another kind of rehearsal, a quiet performance of love, with no audience, no fireworks, only one truth to never allow it to be turned into a tool for someone else's marketing. The next morning, sunlight slanted through the kitchen window, spilling across the table. The pen lay there on the appendix. Its nib touched the paper, leaving a streak of ink like a carving etched into wood. I knew this was not just a signature. This was the final boundary, the place where duty ended and submission was refused. Then I printed another appendix, cold and absolute, impossible to mistake. It was not a threat, but a stake driven deep into the ground, a boundary that could not be moved. The words were simple, but almost stubborn in their clarity. The approved funds today are strictly limited to electricity, basic lighting, kitchen staff, and insurance. They do not cover any media agreements, publishing packages, or additional add-ons. This approval is valid only if I am present and fully participating in the event. If cancelled, the approval is immediately withdrawn. All future approvals must bear my signature. No texts, no voicemails, no delegated substitutes. It was not a warning. It was a line drawn with precision, measured as exact as the watch's ticking hand. I wrote the date, signed, and slipped both documents along with a check into an envelope. Next to it, I left another envelope blank intentionally, as a reminder, not everything given is worth receiving. The clock on the mantel still kept steady time. The house seemed to breathe with the breath of early morning. I put on my coat, tucked the pocket watch into my pocket. It sat firm against my thigh, like a silent assurance. Out on the road, my breath turned into small white clouds in the chill of late November. I watched them fade, thinking, some things we release because we choose to, and some because we must. At the roadside mailbox, I slid the envelope through the iron slot, listening as paper scraped against metal, followed by a single click as it shut. The sound echoed in my chest like a bolt, sealing a decision that could never be undone. One task was complete. But not the final battle, only a single screw tightened, and sometimes just one screw fastened firmly is enough to keep the whole machine from collapsing. Entering the house, I set the cup of coffee down. The steam rose to my face, reminding me that there was no more time to delay. I dialed Mr. Chen. He picked up, without preamble, speaking directly. "You already signed the rider?" "I did," I replied, "but with conditions." "Did you mark it restricted funds?" "Yes," I said, feeling as if I had drawn a chalk line across stone clear, impossible to erase. He gave a faint smile. "Good. Beyond that scope, anyone's spending would be as if throwing money out the window. Do you want me to open a separate escrow account for the remaining essentials? Having a clear purpose will keep everything in line." "Do it. Only for electricity, kitchen, and insurance. Providers: Titan Energy Rentals, Emerald Feast Catering, Rose Hill Estate Policy Carrier. I want a precise transfer schedule, and I must have the right to stop at any time." "Consider it done," he answered. "And Richard?" "Yes?" "If they try to cut you from the guest list after this, call me. That presence presumed clause isn't a joke." We hung up. Simple, like two men who once carried timber together, no ceremony, just silence and moving on to the next task. I poured more coffee, opened my email. Adrian had sent the revised list from the night before. I replied with the rider image attached along with the addendum, typing 2 words: escrow only. I pictured his face tightening, lips pressed, like a teacher forced to slash apart a favorite student's essay. The typing bubble appeared, then vanished. At last, a short line: "Understood. We will proceed in accordance with legal counsel. Sophie wants confirmation on the media package." I typed back: "Not funded. Not happening." 1 word. Like an iron latch closing. 3 dots waiting. Then silence. In my mind I could almost hear Adrian's sigh, the red pen crossing out every extravagant flourish in the plan. Another message from Clara Jensen. "Rose Hill confirmed receipt of the rider. Thanks, restriction noted. For your information, the inspection slot for the temporary company reception area has been scheduled this afternoon. If power rights aren't confirmed before noon on Saturday, they'll take that slot." I replied, "Understood. If they need it, let them use it. We work with reality, not illusion." She responded briefly, "Copy." The tone of someone competent, sent to someone she also regarded as competent. I stood by the sink, looking out. A bird flew from tree branch to fence, its feet gripping firm, instinct never doubting. I once thought Daniel would be just as steady. But suddenly I wondered, was I the wind that made him want to lift off the ground and try to fly higher? The landline rang, once, twice. I picked it up. "Mr. Cole," Adrian said, voice smooth but thinner than yesterday. "Thanks for the rider. I passed it to Clara at Titan. Emerald Feast has listed you as the primary responsible party. Gregory Shaw will call to confirm the transfer time." "Good. And the media package?" He lowered his tone, as if trying to soften the weight. "No," I answered. One word, heavy as a latch. "Got it. I'll adjust expectations." "Adjust them to my budget," I pressed each word. "It will save you more times than you realize." He gave a dry laugh. "You'd be surprised how many people hate change." "I don't," I cut in, then hung up before he could defend his client. 10 past 10. The screen lit up. Gregory Shaw. "Mr. Cole, thank you for being clear. If the escrow funds are in place before tomorrow morning, everything will be fine. If not, we'll have to redirect." The hospital is dangling a donut in front of my team. "Tempting," I replied, "but pastries only fill you for a moment. Better to choose a real meal." "We'll try," he said. I printed the escrow forms Mr. Chen had sent, signed them right there on the kitchen table, then scanned them back. On the screen, my signature sat beside a concise list of permitted expenses. The feeling was right. Not righteousness, just simply right. On impulse, I wrote in the margin of the notebook, "Sign bones only." I closed the notebook. A soft thud, like sealing a wooden box. Inside, no gold or silver, only bones, the one thing that remains when every glittering shell has fallen away. At 11:20, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a knock, but the bell echoing through the house as if someone were pressing directly against the rhythm of my heart. I set down my cup of coffee, wiped my hands on the kitchen towel, and felt my chest pound with an unusual beat before turning the lock. It wasn't Sophie Grant. It wasn't a delivery worker with a stack of papers clipped in gold. It was Daniel Cole. He stood there without a coat, only in a thin sweater, as though he believed the weather would spare him. His eyes were too bright, like light bulbs on the verge of burning out. His smile was forced, straining for calm but failing. Behind him, the November sun draped gently across his shoulders like a mother's hand. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Come in," I replied, stepping aside. Daniel walked straight into the kitchen. His steps were familiar, yet his hand traced along the edge of the table, as if following an old map. He didn't sit. His eyes swept over the clock on the mantel, the photograph of Cedar Brook Creek. He swallowed dryly. "Dad, you already signed the rider," he began. "Yes, but you added conditions." "Of course." He nodded, as if the final puzzle piece had just locked into place. "Sophie said you used an escrow account." "That's right." Daniel glanced at the stack of papers on the table, then looked up. "Why do you have to control so much?" I drew a deep breath, letting the answer fall heavy, like a stone dropped into a well. "Because I'm paying for the meal, for safety, for enough light so you can see your wife's face clearly on your wedding day. I'm not paying for some stranger to take pictures and sell them to a cheap magazine. I'm not paying for applause." "Not everyone is a stranger," he said quietly. "Then what are they?" I asked. Daniel let his hands drop, powerless, like someone who knew words could never undo actions. "It's one day," he whispered, "a big day." "Yes," I replied. "A big day indeed, but you must choose, big in a way that lasts, or big, like fireworks bright for 3 seconds, then gone. A wedding should reflect your marriage, not a publicity campaign." He winced. I was proud I did not wince with him. "Sophie is afraid you're deliberately trying to embarrass us." "If that were my goal," I smirked, "I would have hired drones to live stream your arguments." Daniel almost laughed, but held it back. "She won't change the seating," he said, his tone like an official notice. "You will," I replied firmly. "Or not. The only leverage in this world belongs to you." He stared down at his shoes, the tips turning on the wooden floor like a child called to the board. "And if I don't?" "Then it's the same," I answered. "Except I'd be paying to be erased from it." Daniel looked up. His eyes were no longer the same brightness as when he arrived this time. They held something real. "I don't want to erase you," he burst out, his voice trembling, as if surprised at his own words. "Then don't," I said. He exhaled long and heavy, then finally sat down, both hands resting on the table. "You know I love Mom," he said. "I know," said an. I kept thinking if I could make it perfect, it would patch the tear. But the more I patch, the more the stitches show. I nodded. People build to live, not to make a pretty picture for passers-by to judge. Daniel nodded too, then faster, like a man who had just taken a sip of water after a long thirst. "Sophie will be furious," he said. "She already is," I replied, "and that has nothing to do with you or me. It only has to do with what she needs photographs." He stood, his hand resting on the back of the chair, then pulling away as if from fire. "I'll talk to Adrian," he murmured. He meant to say more, but stopped. "Thanks for the kitchen," he said instead, closing with those words as he stepped outside without stumbling into any ending. The door closed. I remained still, listening to the wind slip through the cracks. A conversation had just passed, but what lingered was silence, silence thick as the fog of late November. The sound of the lock clicked, like a final punctuation mark. The house immediately swallowed my breath, leaving an emptiness colder than before. Conversations, brief as they were, still lingered like ghosts hidden in the brick walls, haunting the air. I picked up the forgotten cup of coffee on the kitchen counter, took a sip, cold, bitter, and stale. Some mornings don't deserve warmth, just enough to swallow down a small compromise with myself and with the days ahead. The phone vibrated. A message from Nathan Price. "The deposit has arrived in the mailbox." "Good," he added. "Crystal Lens Studios just secured an exclusive with a lifestyle blog. But they demand a captivating story. If not, they'll make one up." "Let them," I typed back. "Drama always burns faster than truth. We'll stick to the script." A few minutes later, Nathan sent a photo. The rooftop of Silverwood Manor at noon. The steps were deserted, sunlight stretching like knife marks across the concrete floor. A maintenance truck was parked by the fence, small as an insect yet standing like a silent gatekeeper. Right after that, Margaret Hill texted, "In 1 hour, Hajuru will check the company's reception. If your rider hasn't arrived, surely Clara Jensen has already turned on the lights. When they shine, no one will care who paid the bill." I replied briefly, "Truth must be respected more than feelings." At exactly noon, an email from Adrian Blake dropped into my inbox like a cold stone. The subject was lifeless. The body contained only this: "Daniel Cole wants to discuss some adjustments this afternoon." I paused at the 2 words Daniel wants, heavy as a stone stuffed in the pocket of a man struggling to stand straight. It wasn't Sophie Grant asking. It wasn't us suggesting. For the first time, Daniel himself spoke. I answered immediately. 2:30, at my house. Alone. No entourage. No one needed to translate the will of my son. A few minutes later, the phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. I let it ring out, then quietly listened to the voicemail. "Mr. Cole, this is Elena Marquez from Crystal Lens Studios. We are very eager to cover the Cole Grant wedding and would like to confirm your presence for a short interview before the event. We will tell the story from multiple perspectives. That way it will be more engaging for the audience and for the sponsors." I gave a small laugh, one only I could hear. People always assume every story is born to be put on camera, forgetting that some stories are meant to be lived, not sold. I deleted the message, opened my laptop, and quickly typed an email. "Dear Elena, thank you, but I must decline. We do not require any media coverage. I have copied this email to Adrian Blake." I paused, then added one final line, brief but sufficient for Adrian to understand. "If you proceed without written consent, consider this email an official legal notice. A wedding day is not a free stage for anyone." At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang again. Not Sophie. It was a delivery man, his dark shirt stained with sweat, holding a canvas bag and a clipboard. He looked as though he came from an entirely different world, simple, hurried, a stark contrast to the polished emails from Crystal Lens Studios. He handed me a folder from Silverwood Manor, vendor access passes, a parking map, and a service schedule precise as clockwork. I signed for it, opened the folder, the paper still carrying the scent of fresh ink. On the map, Squares were arranged like chess pieces, orderly and exact. Then my eyes stopped on one line. Power confirmed. Generator drop at 8 o'clock. Sound check at 2 p.m. My chest settled, as if touched by a familiar breath. This was the language of reality, not glossy pages chasing views. The framework, not the makeup. The only thing that can stand firm once the lights have gone out and the audience has left. At 25 minutes past 4, the crunch of gravel at the entrance signaled Daniel Cole's arrival. He walked in with his back straighter than usual, though his shoulders still carried a heavy weight, like a man heading into an interview unprepared, forced to answer only with the truth. Dust clung to his shoes, as if on his way here he had detoured somewhere to draw one last breath of courage. His hand clenched the seating chart so tightly that the paper edges were crumpled. "Let's sit down at the table and talk," he began. "All right," I nodded. He spread the seating chart across the table. On the sheet were messy crossouts, pen strokes pressed so hard they cut like scars that had yet to heal. The chart resembled more a ransom note paid with sweat and compromise than a plan for celebration. He pushed it toward me. Before my hand even touched it, my eyes caught one crucial detail. The family table. My name was written there, carefully, just like the others, placed beside my brother and his wife. Not shoved behind a column, not in the front row either. A real seat. A narrow path leading directly to the main table, just wide enough for one person to walk through. "Not in the front," Daniel said, as if he had already anticipated the pride I never asked for. "But not in the back either." "Good," I replied, this time making sure he heard that I truly meant it. My chest loosened, as if someone had finally unfastened an invisible cord that had bound me for so long. He sat down, exhaling slowly. "Sophie must have struggled to accept this," I said. "She thinks this means you've won," he answered, his voice tinged with a helpless humor. "If holding on to the truth is called winning," I said slowly, "then I never needed that kind of glory. But if compromise means crowning a lie, then I would rather lose forever." He nodded, eyes fixed on the chart. "It feels almost like a map." "Exactly," I replied. "A map to know where we stand and where we are going." He twisted the ring on his finger, lowering his voice. "I told Adrian to drop the media package." The words weren't loud, but I could hear the tremor of a young man learning to stand on his own side. "Good," I answered. "You'll love your wedding more if it truly belongs to you." He stayed silent for quite a while, then carefully folded the chart, more gently than folding a bill, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Every motion was slow, deliberate, as if he knew he had just laid the first stone of a bridge. And that bridge would one day have to bear the weight of an entire life even when the lights dimmed and the audience had all gone home. We sat in silence for a moment, not awkward. Daniel Cole stood up, adjusted his jacket, and paused at the doorway. "Dad." "Yes?" "Do you know Mom hates drones?" I smiled faintly. "Your mother has always preferred birds." He smiled too. In that instant, I saw the 8-year-old boy he once was at Cedarbrook Creek, his small hands trembling as he held a tiny fish, believing he had just conquered the whole world. But that image flickered only briefly. Immediately after, before me stood a man in his 30s, struggling to shoulder the weight of his own life. The door closed behind him like a page turned too quickly. I could hear the crunch of his shoes on the gravel, each heavy step somehow making me feel lighter. I turned on the faucet, letting the icy water run. I washed 2 cups that had never been used and set them on the rack. Motion followed stillness. Stillness yielded again to motion. The pendulum of the clock kept swinging steadily. The phone rang. Sophie Grant. I picked it up. "Richard, I just looked at the new chart." Her voice was urgent, with no greeting, not even a pause, as though she had barged straight into the room without bothering to knock. I cut her off. "Your next sentence will be, 'This chart doesn't look like what we discussed.' You're turning a splendid day into a dull shareholder meeting," she snapped back. "And I..." I replied firmly. Am respecting structure. Flowers can change with the seasons, but it's the structure that keeps the roof from falling. Do you want flowers, or do you want the ceiling not to collapse? There was the sharp sound of a glass set down on the table, then hurried footsteps. I imagined her turning her back on someone just to swallow her anger. This is cooperation, she said, trying to remain calm. I knew she meant between herself and Daniel, but in my mind, cooperation was between her and me. Exactly, I said, and cooperation requires binding terms. I sign for electricity, for heating, for food, for insurance, but I will not sign for applause. She sighed, the sound compressed like tears held back. You don't understand, Richard. They will talk. They will take photos, write blogs, twist the story into distorted fragments. They've been doing that long before this wedding, I answered. The difference is, this time, I choose what they distort, and at least it will begin with the truth. Then click, she hung up. The abrupt sound echoed like an exclamation mark suspended in the room. I set the phone down on the table, the dry thud striking like confirmation. At exactly 5:30, Mr. Chen called, his voice calm. The vendors have signed. You're done. If they deviate, you just pull the lever, like flipping a breaker. One switch, and the entire celebration falls into darkness. Power doesn't lie in the lights, but in the hand that holds the switch. Good, I replied. One more thing. If anyone tries to rearrange the seating, can we tie sponsorship directly to my presence, so they can't maneuver so easily? I already drafted the letter, Chen said. It's in your inbox. I opened it while he was still speaking. A short passage, polite yet sharp as a blade. If you erase me from the table, consider yourself as having pulled the tablecloth, letting every glass shatter on the floor. This is not revenge, but a reminder. Everything exists because of balance. After dinner, there was only soup and bread, a simple meal, reminiscent of the black and white photographs in an old album. I broke off a piece of bread, crumbs scattering softly onto the table. No parties, no extravagance, just enough to live, and enough to make me wonder, in life, how many things do we truly need to be enough instead of plenty or excess? I put on my coat and walked through the streets. Dry leaves rustled underfoot, creating a familiar background melody. A neighbor raking leaves waved, "It's cold tonight." I only nodded. The reminder sounded like a distant warning. The cold comes not only from the wind, but from human skin. Passing by a lit window, I saw a family gathered around the dinner table. A boy slapped his hand down, sending water trembling in his glass. The mother hurried to wipe it up but kept smiling brightly. That smile wasn't for me, yet it pierced straight through the hollow in my chest. I stood still longer than I should have, then moved on. When I returned home, the phone lit up. Nathan Price texted. The company reception had approved the rehearsal schedule. Clara Jensen wrote, "Your spot is still reserved, just need the transfer." Crystal Lynn Studios added, "Could you share a father's perspective?" To them, perspective was nothing more than an extra camera angle, not the heart of a man carrying scars. I replied, "I know a man who values structure more than display." Nathan answered briefly, "Interesting." He sent another photo from the estate corridor, chairs stacked neatly, their shadows squared across the concrete floor. I replied, "Well done. Tomorrow morning we'll settle the payment to keep the lights on. After that, let the light tell the truth itself." He answered only with a single dot, "Our old code. I understand." Before sleeping, I took an empty envelope and with a black marker wrote, "Publication package." The letters trembled slightly, yet remained firm. The ink bled through the thin paper, marking the back. I stared at it for a long while before placing it into the drawer, the one that kept the things I had once hidden from the light. I wound the pocket watch. The small clicks rang evenly, like metal tightening its resolve. I thought, I am like that spring wound just enough. It endures. Too tight. It breaks. People protect themselves in the same way. Standing at the bedroom threshold, I turned off the last light. In the darkness, the house revealed its shape, the broken chair from a past winter, the scratch Daniel left on the wooden table as a child. Objects carry scars too, like family. They do not disappear, they simply remain silently. I lay down, listening to the quiet, the crackle of the fireplace, the distant hum of a car, and the steady rhythm of the clock. Not triumph, not pride, only the calm after choosing the hard but right path, leaving the easy but wrong behind on the kitchen counter. Tomorrow would bring more calls, more signatures, perhaps even a confrontation I never intended. But tonight there was only me in a house that still remembered my name and one final appendix, where my son had placed me on the list. Neither at the front, nor abandoned at the back, just seated in the rightful place of a father. It wasn't enough to mend everything, but it was enough to last until morning. No one repairs an entire life in a single night. Sometimes, all it takes is a temporary joint, a small wedge to keep the door from slamming shut. Enough so that tomorrow we might tighten the one bolt that truly matters and leave the shiny screws to those who believe that glittering light is the same as strength. Friday morning, I didn't have to lift a finger. The cracks in Daniel Cole and Sophie Grant's perfect plan spread on their own, like a wall after a heavy rain. The first call came just as I sipped my coffee. The voice of the catering staff rang out, short and dry. They still hadn't received the final payment for Sunday's reception. If no money came in before 6 o'clock this evening, they would pull out. I let her finish. In the background, knives hit cutting boards. Orders were shouted. That sound was once familiar to me. It recalled my mother's small kitchen, where life always kept a rhythm. But now, it sounded no different from the frantic heartbeat of a dying plan. When she stopped, I answered simply, "You should call the groom, he's in charge." She replied, "They had called, but Daniel told them to contact me." I let a single beat of silence pass, then said, "That's strange," and hung up. I tore a small slip of paper, wrote 4 words, "Cannot pay the banquet," folded it, and tucked it into my pocket. Sometimes a thin piece of paper can weigh as much as an entire lifetime. Less than an hour later, the florist called too, telling the same story. By noon, the air around me grew heavy, like the suffocating pressure before a summer storm. I decided to drive to Daniel's house. Not to fix things for him, but to look him in the eye as the walls began to fall. Sophie opened the door. Faded lipstick, hair hastily tied up, a damp towel still in her hand. The faint smell of burnt coffee drifted from the kitchen. She didn't look at me, only muttered, "He's in the study." The study tried to put on airs of grandeur. Prefab wooden shelves, a few framed prints that only looked expensive at a glance. On the desk, an opened bottle of liquor, a glass with nothing left but melting ice. A pen lay across a stack of loan papers, as if exhausted from signing too many times. Daniel sat there, one hand gripping his phone, the other raking through his hair. "No, I told you, it's coming soon. I just need a few more days," he snapped, then froze when he saw me at the door. "I'll call you back later," he muttered, dropping the phone like he had touched hot coal. I looked at him. "Trouble?" "Nothing I can't handle," he answered, too quickly, too forced. I gave a thin smile. "Sounds exactly like last time, when you promised to pay the tuition on time, and then asked me to sign the check." Sophie appeared in the doorway, biting her lip, eyes darkened by sleepless nights. She hesitated a moment, then burst out, "Daniel, is there anything you can actually handle? The catering service called me because they couldn't reach you, and now the florist too. We already agreed on the order of priorities, first the venue, then the dress, then the banquet. But no, you had to." She stopped, her eyes flicking to me, as if she had just brushed against a secret. "Had to what?" I asked, slowly. Sophie inhaled deeply, then dropped each word like a weight. "Had to borrow that stupid loan from Adrian Blake without telling me. And now the interest." "Sophie!" Daniel shot up. The chair screeched across the floor. His face went pale, sweat gathering at his temples. He looked no different from a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar, except this time the price would not be so cheap. In that moment, as he flung the papers aside, I caught a glimpse of an envelope sticking out, stamped with a name I knew well, Adrian. I didn't need to read further to understand. I adjusted the cuff of my shirt slightly, then repeated, my voice low and cold. Adrian. The moment that name slipped out, Daniel jolted as though I had struck a secret code. His fingers drummed wildly against the table, frantic and out of control. Sophie turned her face away, biting her lip, her nails digging into her arm as if to restrain a trembling fit. It's nothing, Daniel snapped, his voice tight as a drawn string. We'll handle it ourselves. Handle it yourselves? Sophie gave a dry laugh, her hand clutching a napkin that still carried the burnt scent of coffee. Handle it and pay the bills too, is that it? I rose slowly, letting each movement press weight into the room. Very well, I'll let you handle it. Stepping outside, I saw Thomas Reed, the neighbor, watering the grass, his other hand lazily swinging a beer can. He squinted at me, half curious, half uneasy. The wedding's this weekend for your boy, right? So I've heard. Thomas lowered his voice, glancing around before adding, Hope they can manage. I've seen a few loan sharks lurking around here. And when Adrian's name comes up, well, better be careful. That bunch doesn't just want money. They like to take pride too. I nodded, offered a thin smile of thanks, but carved every word deep into memory. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I stopped by a cafe near the venue, and there, fate handed me another piece of the puzzle. Sophie's voice rose from a corner, loud and seething. She sat with a bridesmaid, stirring her cappuccino so furiously the foam spilled over the rim. I told them to scale it down, but no. Now the bank is breathing down our necks. Adrian keeps calling. If Daniel's father doesn't step in, we're finished. Her friend asked softly. He'll help, won't he? Sophie let out a laugh, sharp and bitter enough to hush the cafe for a breath. He always plays the dignified one, talking like a law book. But men like that are terrified of losing face. In the end, he'll have to open his wallet. Daniel said so. I sipped my coffee slowly. Only one thought flickered in my mind. They were mistaken. I do not confuse dignity with weakness. Back in the car, I called the venue management. Their tone was polite yet resolute, like a velvet-wrapped blade. We understand the situation, but if there is no transfer before 5:30 tomorrow evening, the file will be automatically canceled. No exceptions. I thanked them and hung up. By the time I reached home, the sun had slipped behind the row of houses. My phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. Need to talk tonight. I stared at the screen, the glow reflecting off the rippling wine in my glass. A sun begging for rescue, yet still trying to command. Just like I once was, except now, there was only me, and no one left to untangle the mess for him. I waited another hour before replying. Busy tomorrow. 2 words. But enough to keep him restless all night. I stepped onto the porch, poured another drink, and watched the darkness spread across the yard. A single image filled my mind, the lake surface still calm, while no one knew a storm waited beneath. The thing about cracks is this. Sometimes you don't need force to tear them wide open. You only need to let the structure's own weight collapse it. I placed a small slip of paper with the word Adrian on the table, then set my glass over it. The golden light through the glass blurred the name, made it vanish. But I knew the moment I lifted the glass, it would reappear, ready to be the final blow. And so I sat, waiting. The cracks kept spreading. Soon enough, the whole curtain would fall apart on its own. 7:12 a.m. Before the sun touched the kitchen window, the phone on the counter buzzed, droning like a mosquito trapped in a glass jar. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. Nathan Price never wasted words. Any updates? His voice was hoarse but firm. Your target isn't just the man running the show. He's funneling money through an LLC called Hayes Global Ventures, a separate account, Short-term advances to grease payments to vendors. That's what he said himself. Steam spread from the kettle, thin and cold. Whose money? I asked. Partly his, Nathan replied, lowering his voice. But mostly not. A private line, probably thanks to a banker friend who likes being thanked with a few articles in the press. 2% interest per week. A velvet noose, Richard. It tightens slowly, but it tightens for sure. I've seen plenty drown in it. The kettle clicked. I poured over the coffee grounds, letting the aroma drown out the last of the night. So if the groom needs to look flush, I said, then Adrian will make him look flush, until his father signs. Exactly, Nathan nodded. Daniel is already in, Sophie says. We borrowed from Adrian. She says it like it's already fact. I know, I answered. Nathan stayed silent a few seconds, then lowered his tone even more. Do you want me to go with you when you talk to him? I set the cup down, but I want a camera aimed directly at the door. Nathan chuckled softly. That I can handle. When I hung up, I stood at the sink, both hands wrapped around the mug, listening to the house breathe. My shadow faint on the kitchen window, a father who once told his son never to sink into debt, now counting each step as that son sank deeper. Every structure reaches the moment when someone lets go, and then its strength is revealed. This wedding was no different, polished on the surface, but tangled with debt underneath. All I had to do was step back, and the truth would expose itself. 9:30, I called Adrian. He answered in a cheerful voice, as though just stepping into a ballroom lit with chandeliers. Richard, I was just about to call. The kitchen's solid, the power's locked in. Clara confirmed the rider. Emerald Feast catering is scheduled. We need to meet this morning, I cut in. A pause, then his tone shifted. Of course. Office or your home? I prefer home meetings. 10:30, I said. Alone. I hung up, calm again, as though I had just chosen the right wrench for the right bolt. I tidied the kitchen not to impress, but because order in this house was the only thing I could control amid the chaos outside. 2 cups facing each other, a stack of papers, a fountain pen. Before every trial, I used to line up pens like that. Some called it superstition. I called it signal. The battle begins. 10:28, the doorbell rang, a polite chime, like a guest arriving to hear the truth. Adrian wore a blue suit, a safe color to blend anywhere without notice. His smile was polished, but his eyes scanned the room, searching for cameras. Richard, he extended his hand. Thank you for having me. His hand was soft, not a hand used to labor, but one that only pushed papers for others to sign. He lifted the glass of water, still smiling. I'm fully charged. Saturday, he chose the seat facing the window. The organizer always wants light on his face. I let him. I must stress. He opened his case, pulling out a file, voice smooth. Your clarity has been extremely helpful. Vendors like clarity. So do I. You prefer liquidity, I replied, letting the word drop between us. That's the commodity you're selling between clarity and reality. The corner of his eye twitched when I added, 2% a week. Every percent a week. He laughed, a rehearsed laugh. Weddings are money-eating beasts, Richard. I only fronted a few small sums. Everyone in this business does. I don't care what everyone does, I cut in. I care when my name is dragged in without my consent. Pages rustled. He opened the file. Your name isn't on the loan, the groom signed. But the groom sent me an invoice for $125,000 and listed me as the responsible party. My tone pressed hard. Your whole system is built on the assumption that my signature will appear at the right time, and when it doesn't, your system collapses. Adrian's smile faltered. You're not wrong, he turned the contract, sliding a condensed version across. As long as the funds arrive before the wedding day, nobody notices. Someone notices, I said. Daniel is learning what interest means. Sophie is learning how a waitlist can crush anyone, and the vendors are learning what it's like to hear tomorrow again and again from a man who thinks tomorrow will admire him. Silence hung. He lowered his voice. So what do you want? I sat upright, reading the terms like a verdict. 1. No extensions, not even an hour. 2. No promises to any vendor unless confirmed in writing by me. 3. You do not use my name to guarantee anything, no negotiation. Adrian pressed his pen to paper, ink failing to flow. I couldn't tell if it was the pen or his sweat. Daniel will be in trouble, he muttered. He's in enough trouble. He'll survive. He wet his lips. If your goal is to teach your son a lesson, you're succeeding. But lessons like this leave aftershocks. A wedding missing pieces looks small. Small can be real. Small can be beautiful, I replied. Small enough for one table with a father sitting at it. He scribbled meaningless lines, then nodded. I'll draft a memo. No extensions, no assumptions. All vendor communication goes through you. And the loan. I tapped the file. He drew a deep breath, then said, We'll unwind once the escrow clears. Emerald Feast Catering and Titan Energy Rentals are paid. The line is clean. Rose Hill Estate paid Ryder. Clara sent the receipts. I pulled the sheet closer, pressing the pen so hard the ink nearly tore the page. I wrote 3 words. No more float. 3 dry words, lying heavy like a coffin lid shutting on his hot money scheme. Mark glanced up at the mantel. Was that your father's? I nodded toward the pocket watch. Yes, I replied. He lifted it between 2 fingers, turned it back and forth like a trinket, then smirked. Beautiful. This kind doesn't keep time as precisely as digital, but it holds what people want to remember. And you, Richard? What do you keep in there? I looked at him. For Adrian, value only lay in appearances. For me, this watch was the time my father left behind, heavier than any metal. Adrian stood. Richard, I'll send the memo within an hour. I have one more thing, I cut in. The air in the room seemed to contract. Crystal lens, I said. His smile froze, as if the mask needed more glue. He lifted his glass of water, pretended to sip to avoid my eyes. I figured as much. They move quickly. Ambitious, too. They called me, I replied. I made it clear, we don't need coverage. We can control them. The best control is removal. No media package, no articles. If they're present, it's only as vendors, not storytellers. Adrian raised an eyebrow, gave a dry laugh. Understood. As he left, I watched. His steps weren't hurried, as though time was a ribbon to be tied whenever he pleased. But I knew, tie it too tightly, and the ribbon leaves a mark. And today, that mark was his, not mine. At exactly 11:20, his email arrived, bridge and vendor messaging confirmation. I read every line slowly, like reviewing a confession, then hit forward to Chen. My fingers struck the keys dryly, like sealing an envelope. Chen replied with a single short line. I poured a second cup of coffee, my eyes resting on the list taped to the fridge. Signed to the bone, not the brass. Noon is the cliff. If they want it easy, let them pay with effort. Half like a mutter in a storm, half like a blueprint already drawn. The phone rang. Daniel. I answered on the 4th ring. What did you tell Adrian? He asked directly. The truth. He just sent me a letter long as a novel. Daniel's voice was tight. No extensions, no Eli, nothing. He said we're entering the final hour. If it fails, it'll be like a collapsed wedding, and everyone will see you as the one who ruined it. If the party collapses, it collapses on its own, I replied coldly. I just won't pay to buy the rope to hang myself. Silence on the line. I heard his breathing, ragged and restrained. Sophie is very upset, he finally said. I expected that. She wants a story. I only pay for a day. Crystal Lens says they can run a feature. Enough. I cut him off. This is where you stop. He was silent. Electricity, kitchen, insurance, people, I continued. The rest is noise. If you want fireworks to launch your marriage, rent them yourself. I won't buy them for you. Daniel breathed heavily, then hung up, which meant he had to choose. Return to being a child, or stand as a man. At 3:30, Sophie called. I let it ring long before answering. Richard, her voice polished, trying for civility. We need to discuss optics. Number, we don't. I'm sorry, but we must discuss the plan. You're building a life whose walls can't bear the weight. They'll crack, Sophie. You think my castle is built on sand? I know how to drive piles. Her voice was sharp. You can refuse media, but you can't stop me from telling the story another way. Tell it, I said. But remember, wooden walls still burn, if no electricity keeps the lights on. Her tone hardened. Adrian said you canceled the media package. Correct. People expect that. People expect a wedding, and they'll have one. She exhaled sharply. Fine, but the quartet stays. Keep your music, I'll keep your lights. The call ended with a cold click, as if she wanted to prove she was in control. But the house didn't believe her. Neither did I. That afternoon, Daniel came by. He stood at the door, tired, like someone forced into too many roles, none of which he liked. Walk? We walked under the street lamps. At first, both silent. His steps heavy, as though his pockets were full of stones. At the third intersection, he spoke. I called Adrian. He referred to you as Sir. I know. I changed your seat. Table number 4, family table. I heard, thank you. He nodded, lips pressed tight. I told Sophie I wanted you there. She spoke of image. I spoke of father. We're not good at negotiating. You will be, or not. Marriage is what you build after the wedding. He stood under the lamp, looking up. I took that loan thinking apologizing later would be easier than asking first, but I don't want to be that kind of man. But this month you were. Next month, you get to choose again who you want to be. He laughed hoarsely, like metal scraping stone. You'll come, sit at the table, eat dinner, and let me be a man on my own? I'll eat dinner, and I'll watch you be a man. He nodded. In that nod, I glimpsed again the boy once by the creek's edge, believing the water could be his friend. Late at night, I opened my notebook and wrote 2 lines. Bridge money ends where adulthood begins. Seat given, not begged. I closed the notebook, laid the pencil across it like a bar to the door, then set the pocket watch on top, letting the metal press down on the mark of graphite. Today's story, I left there. Tomorrow I would open it and write on. 8:30 in the evening. The last message from Nathan Price appeared. Crystal Lens Studios just dropped the teaser, Koi Fish, a big weekend at Rosehill Estate, the most beautiful love under real light. Attached was a photo of the entrance, a stone arch, a straight gravel path, the shadow of a man holding a camera stretched long across the ground. No face, no name. Only a place, ready to become the backdrop for someone else's story. In the image, the koi pond water clearly showed ripples spreading outward as if a stone had just fallen in. It could have been a fish splashing. It could have been a human hand. But I knew for certain, those ripples would reach into tomorrow. I texted back. Good. Real light is always cheaper than rented light. Before going to bed, I made my usual patrol, back door, kitchen, windows. Each time the latch clicked into place, the sound was dry and final, like a seal closing on the old day. Passing through the kitchen, I stopped at the chair Helen Cole used to sit in. Now it held only the warmth of memory. The glass door reflected my shadow, a man far older than the mirror had shown that morning. In the living room, I switched off the lamp. The last glimmer of light flashed across the pocket watch. The hands reflected a thin blade of light, slicing the day from the night. I left it there, standing as a silent witness. I sat down at the table, opened the drawer, and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. I wrote a few lines, not for anyone else, but as a covenant with myself. Tomorrow I will sit, but I will not kneel. I will pay, but I will not sell my name. I will be present, but I will not let them turn me into their backdrop. I set down the pen, folded the paper, and placed it beneath the watch. Tomorrow there will be neat rows of chairs, glowing candles, and perhaps a sudden gust of wind that blows the veil in the middle of vows trying too hard to sound important. I imagined a single candle snuffed out, smoke rising in stubborn threads, weaving its way into every photograph, every video they meant to craft into a story. My name will be on the seating card, not at the head table to boast, not shoved to the far margins, just a place enough to state the truth of who I am. If the lights blaze on and they applaud, that is their concern. My part is simpler: sit in my rightful place, pay for what is worth keeping, and let the rest collapse into the noise it was always destined to be. I have been patient for many months. But patience has never meant forgiveness. Late at night, I sat again in the kitchen, spinning an old coin across the table. It rolled in circles, humming in faint notes, then slowed, slower still, until it stopped completely. When it lay still, I knew, tomorrow, the final game would no longer be a hypothesis. I remember, 2 weeks before the wedding. At that time, Daniel Cole and Sophie Grant were trying to cover up the cracks spreading quickly, while I held in my hand a piece that could bring the whole tower down. That piece carried the name Martin Holloway. The phone rang. That old name appeared on the screen. Martin only called when there was trouble, or when trouble was about to arrive. "Richard," his voice was hoarse, "you still know a few people in finance, don't you?" I stepped out onto the porch, my hand gripping the coffee mug so tight my knuckles turned white, but my voice was calm. "Some, what's going on?" Martin sighed. "You should keep an eye on your son. My niece works at Northbridge Bank. She found that the joint account of Daniel and Sophie, money going out is more than money coming in. And some expenses, to be blunt, don't look like wedding costs at all." I stayed silent. He continued. "A private jeweler, the Elms Boutique Hotel, and here the key a name, Summit Edge Consulting." I picked up a pen, wrote those 3 words on the edge of a newspaper, wrote so hard the paper tore. I stared at that name as if it were a code that had to be cracked. As for the boutique hotel, there was no need to decode. I knew all too well what it implied. When I hung up, I sat quietly before the darkened glass door. Protecting Daniel from bad choices was no longer my role, but letting him bear the consequences. Perhaps that was truly the final duty of a father. That night, I opened the laptop. The bluish glow of the screen lit up an aged face lined with wrinkles. I followed the leads one by one, searched the jeweler, traced hotel room numbers, opened Summit Edge files. By 2 in the morning, the data before me was enough to confirm Daniel was moving money in ways Sophie would never accept, and I had no intention of telling them directly. Saturday morning, I drove into the city, told acquaintances I had errands, but in truth, I stopped at a small cafe, just 2 blocks from Starlight Bridal, Sophie's favorite shop. I sat in a corner, steam rising from my cup, eyes fixed on the clock. 5 minutes to 10, Sophie appeared. The way she clutched her purse like it held a secret told me the game was about to get tense. Victoria Lane, the shop owner, recognized me at once. She pulled up a chair, lowered her voice. "You know, when a bride starts asking if she can pay in installments, it's no different from asking if it can be canceled easily. Trust me, Richard, I've seen many weddings collapse right here in this fitting room." I only smiled, nodded. A few minutes later, Sophie stepped out, clutching the bridal bag as if holding onto a lifeline. She avoided my eyes, heels clicking quickly across the wooden floor. The dress bag brushed the ground, leaving a chilling sound in the room. "Richard, what are you doing here?" "Just stopped in for a coffee," I answered flatly. I glanced at the bag, asked, "How's the dress?" "Good," she replied quickly, then walked so fast her perfume still lingered in the air. That evening, Sophie called, her voice tense, a mix of anger and worry. "Richard, did you say anything to Victoria? I don't need anyone digging into my finances." "I trimmed a bonsai branch," answered slowly. I only greeted her, but Sophie, when a bride starts asking about installments, it usually means something's already wrong. Silence stretched long, then she snapped. "Daniel and I are fine. The wedding is fine." "I believe so," I replied softly. "Good night." The next day, it was Daniel's turn to call. No greeting. "Dad, why did you talk to Sophie about money?" "I didn't." She spoke to me. "Dad!" I cut in. "Daniel, when you both scratched my name off the guest list, that meant you scratched me off the budget too. Remember that." The line went silent, but that silence was heavier than any confession. 1 week later, the second blow came, this time from Sophie. I stopped by a hardware store, choosing wood, when Thomas Reed, husband of the florist, came over. "Richard, did you hear? Sophie just tried to cancel half the flower order. Grace said she'd lose the deposit, but Sophie didn't argue, just walked away." The plank slipped from my hand, hitting the counter with a dry clatter. I bent to pick it up, but in my eyes one truth was already clear. Sophie no longer cared about the wedding. She was worrying about the marriage itself, one that hadn't even begun. And when a woman sees the exit before she ever steps into the aisle, my son had already lost, long before the wedding music played. That night, I staged a performance. It had to look accidental, yet sharp enough to pierce the mind. I printed an old bank statement from the account a large sum received after selling real estate. I folded it so the figure showed the moment the envelope was opened, then slipped it into a brown cover, writing clearly on the outside, "Real estate documents, confidential." The next morning, I stopped by Daniel Cole's house, carrying a few old tools. In the kitchen, I placed the envelope on the table before washing my hands. Sophie Grant noticed it immediately. Her eyes clung to the words "confidential," as if they were gilded in gold. She pulled a chair closer, like a cat eyeing its prey. When I pulled the envelope back, her eyes flashed as if she had touched treasure just beyond reach. "What's that?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "None of your business," I replied. "It looks important." "Yes, very important." I let the words hang in the air, then walked out. I knew she would tell Daniel. And indeed, 2 days later, Daniel appeared at my house. No warning, no sitting down. "Dad," he began, voice hoarse, "what was in that envelope?" He stood pressed against the table, gripping the chair's edge, half his face lit, half shadowed. "Which envelope?" I asked back. "The one you brought over. Sophie saw it." I shrugged. "Just papers from selling the house. Why?" He stayed silent, fingers tapping unconsciously on the chair's back. A few seconds later, he shook his head. "Nothing." But his eyes said otherwise, hungry, restless. I knew the timing was ripe. Then came the final twist, when Martin Holloway called. "Richard," his voice dropped low, as if someone might be listening. "Summit Edge Consulting isn't just a front. They've been laundering money through a few suburban contracts. And the registered name, Sophie. If exposed at the right time, she'll collapse right at the wedding." The game changed completely. Not only overspending, Sophie was hiding money. Whether Daniel knew or not no longer mattered. What mattered was that I held the leverage. 2 days later, I slipped an envelope into their mailbox. Inside was a public record of Summit Edge, Sophie's name circled in red ink. No note, no signature. That evening, shouting erupted, loud enough for me to hear from 2 houses away, her voice high, his voice breaking, the sound of objects crashing. As the sun set, I understood that wedding was no longer a fairy tale. The question wasn't whether they would marry, but whether they would marry each other. For me, either outcome worked. The memory closed, and here I was again, sitting in the familiar kitchen, only hours away from tomorrow. Morning arrived, gray yet sharp, no mist to hide, no sun to soften. I rose before the alarm, the pocket watch still warm as if it had stood guard all night. I brewed coffee, pressed the shirt, the same one I had worn on Laura's Memorial Day. I placed the card "Table 4, Family" on the mantel beside the watch, then underlined the word "family" with a pencil, as if signing a verdict no one dared to read aloud. 8:12 a.m. The phone buzzed. A text from a number not unfamiliar. "Sophie. Please don't come." No period. Yet the lack of punctuation felt like a full stop. I let the words dangle. In my chest came a click like a bolt finding its thread. I wrote on a sticky note, "Presence is default." I dressed in a dark suit, tie neat, shoes polished. No flamboyance, no mockery. The pocket watch sat in my breast pocket, chain stretched across like a clean line. Before leaving, I slid the signed addendum and Mr. Chen's letter into an envelope, placing it beneath the table card. Not sure I'd need it, but knowing I might. The road to Rose Hill Estate took 15 minutes. The sky threatened rain but held back. Maples shed golden leaves onto gravel. The sweetest sound here was work, cables rolling, radios humming, trucks reversing with their beeping echoes. A man in a polo shirt handed me a name tag, barcode, and a strip of tape, Table 4. The printer had misprinted the hyphen in my surname, looking like an apology. I pinned the tag to my jacket and walked through the staff door. I always preferred the raw truth over carpeted welcomes. Clara Jensen waited in the hall, tablet in hand like a small shield. Writer confirms. Power stable. Kitchen on schedule. Weather wind matches forecast. Her eyes flicked to my tag. "Looks good." "Good," I replied. She nodded. Not every father shows up under circumstances like these. I know. The south lawn looked like a sketch, chairs aligned at right angles, the aisle running straight like stitches across grass. In the distance, the lake shimmered as though polished. Crystal Lens Studios staff tested camera angles, while Nathan Price busied himself adjusting lanterns. He glanced at me once, then looked away, a familiar signal between us. Friends didn't need many words. At 9:45, Adrian Blake arrived. Black suit, pocket square, crisp, half smile in place. We shook hands. "You look sharp," he said. "Like your schedule. Don't let it slip." He nodded, eyes conceding. He had learned respect from those late nights in my kitchen. At 10:30, Daniel texted, "Dad, where are you?" I typed, "Here." 5 seconds later, "Who told you to come?" "Myself." 1 minute later I added, "Good. Forever." At 11:15, Sophie appeared, dressed the right color, but wrong story. 2 satellites orbited her. She walked as if rehearsed for years. Her eyes brushed past me, then left me behind like a doorknob. But minutes later, her voice rang out on the terrace, almost a shout. "Adrian, why haven't we started? Why are they still standing there? And what is he doing here?" The tone silenced the orchestra for a beat. Clara stepped out, voice soft yet firm. "We're following the plan. We'll begin once confirmation is in." Confirmation of what? Family table, card and barcode. Absurd. A plastic badge had become the highest authority here. Daniel stood beside me, voice not loud but steady. "He is family." Sophie looked at Daniel, then around, then back at me. For a flicker, the image in her mind warped. She gripped Daniel's wrist, as if holding a door against the wind. "Do something." He did. He stepped forward. "Dad," he said, this time his voice firm, "come with me." We sat at table 4. The card bearing my name lay there like a blank line awaiting signature. I set it down. Table 4. Family. Clara scanned the barcode. A soft confirmation tone rang. Daniel stood behind, his hand clenching then releasing. A small gesture, but enough to show he had chosen. The servers began to move. The bells rang. The dishes were laid out. That should have been the turning point, but I knew it wasn't yet. 5 minutes later, the fateful slip arrived. Tessa Moore quickly flipped through the script prepared by Crystal Lens Studios. She read aloud, her voice pitched higher than usual. "Can we record a short statement for the perfect love story?" Just 1 sentence. But the entire room froze. Guest smiles vanished. The quartet faltered mid-note, then stopped. Sophie Grant's eyes widened, her lips pressed shut as if she had swallowed ice. Daniel Cole turned to Tessa Moore, speaking slowly and clearly, word by word. "Number not no, thank you, simply no." That no wasn't loud, but it struck like a gavel in court. Guests lowered their glasses, some shuffled their chairs awkwardly. Sophie staggered, as if missing a step off a stair. Daniel turned back toward Adrian Blake. No interviews, no articles, no features. We are not selling this day. The silence was so thick you could hear every breath. I knew just moments earlier this wedding might have passed like 100 others. But the truth had finally spoken, and it came from Daniel. He didn't climb the stage, didn't hold a microphone. He simply stood by table 4, raising his hand. The quartet stopped. His voice carried across the room. I was wrong. It wasn't just a confession. It was like a wooden ruler pressed against the wall, exposing cracks everyone had seen but pretended not to notice. Daniel looked directly at Sophie's parents, forcing their heads to bow, their polite masks falling away in an instant. I turned this day into a play. I rented fake lights, staged false backdrops, just to chase pretty pictures. Many helped, many stayed silent. My father paid for it all. The catering, the insurance, even the lighting, and I still wanted him to pay for a story that was never real. But from now on, it ends. Sophie stepped forward, then halted, her face pale. Daniel continued, firm and decisive. No coverage, no services. Today is only a meal. If you truly care for us, please stay and eat. If not, the door is right there. A couple of guests rose to leave, but Clara Jensen tilted her head, smiling softly. Take your time. The door is always open, but the meal has yet to be served. The whole room exhaled as one. Daniel turned to me. Dad, sit with me. I pulled out a chair. The scrape against the floor was slight, but it echoed like a bell. I sat beside my son. Clara nodded, like a conductor confirming the orchestra had returned to rhythm. Dinner began. Delicious not just because of the menu, but because the fire in the kitchen was real. People ate, spoke in hushed tones, their eyes meeting and slipping away. Sophie's parents sat with the faces of players who had miscalculated their move. Adrian roamed the room, adjusting what didn't need fixing, ignoring what truly did. Midway through the meal, Sophie stood by Daniel, her hand hovering without touching him. Her voice rang out, bright but strained. Can we make a speech? Yes, Daniel answered, then looked at me. I stood, without clearing my throat. Thank you all for coming. That's enough. Let's eat. That was the whole speech. Laughter burst out, because laughing is always easier than crying. I sat down, feeling the heavy pocket watch in my coat, like an invisible hand pressing against my back. Sophie read her prepared lines about luck, community, 2 people sailing one boat. Some nodded, others let it drift past. But when she said our story and glanced at Tessa, her words fell flat, hollow. 2 minutes later, she set the card aside. On the terrace, Adrian found me, lowering his voice. I once chose this profession to give people a special day, but I turned it into selling empty pictures. Thank you for reminding me. The real work is making sure the truth isn't buried. He extended his hand. I shook it. I'm not forcing you, I said. You chose it yourself. He nodded, looking lighter than he had in months. The final turn came quietly. After dessert, Daniel led me to the lake. The water lay still, as if it had never known wind. He pulled a small box from his pocket, gripping it tightly, sweat darkening the fabric. He held it for a long moment, then tucked it back. This Monday I'll return it. This morning I called Northbridge Bank, closed the account at Summit Edge Consulting. Not much remains. I told Sophie to postpone the Santorini honeymoon. Later, we'll go somewhere with our own money. He hesitated, then added, The envelope you left, Sophie saw it. She thought it was a promise. No, I replied. It was a boundary. Out of not longs. Out of not long cess. Out of not longs. Out of not long cess. And it was beltament was not longs. Out of not long cess. And it was be beltament. And it was gether. And it was not longs. And of not long cess. And it was waves longs. And it was not longs. And it was long cess. Out of not longs. He nodded. Now I understand. We stood there, in the kind of silence only a father and son can share after surviving failure yet keeping their word. Daniel sighed softly. I don't know if I should marry her. At least not today. Not like this. I didn't advise. I only said, "You built that room. You can take it down. That is what adulthood means." He looked out at the lake, where the breeze barely rippled the surface. For the first time in months, the reflection came from the real sun, not rented spotlights. Back inside, Daniel told everyone, today there would be no vows, only dinner. He thanked them, apologized, promised to update later. No more services, no more images. He spoke in his own voice. People applauded sometimes. That's the only way to show they had heard. When the party ended, I stopped by the kitchen to thank the chef, then went home. The pocket watch still ticked. I wrote 3 lines. Sit in your rightful seat. Pay the price for the skeletons. Love is not for hire. Somewhere, chairs were being folded. Somewhere, a ring box waited to be returned. Somewhere, an account balanced back to 0. And I had my name on a card, at a table, and a son who had finally learned to call the word Dad as something true. The picture closed, and when it opened again, it was smaller, more real, but this time, it was ours. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about it in the comments. Thank you for watching.